What a fun conversation that was with Chris Chalk. I learned a ton about the basically what it's like to be a lighting programmer on movies and television, and wild life this guy's had. He's made some really good decisions, had some really good luck, and there are some really good lessons along the way for sure as well. So I think anybody who has any interest in getting into television lighting or movie lighting, this would be a great podcast for you. So please enjoy episode number 292. Episode 292 is also brought to you by Elation, a privately held corporation established in 1992 and headquartered in Los Angeles, California. All products are developed and engineered in the USA, with sales and support office locations in the US, Mexico, and Europe, plus distribution via a worldwide dealer network. Please join me in watching their latest Pulse series video.
Inspire your audience's imagination with Elation's Pulse Strobe series, designed to bolster creativity and deliver breathtaking kinetic intensity. The Pulse series empowers designers to create dynamic lighting experiences that captivate any audience. The Pulse series synthesizes mesmerizing lighting experiences with power and precision, allowing designers to create rhythmic, heart-pounding lighting effects with effortless control. Elation's Pulse series.
Hello, and thanks for joining me on Gears of Gear, episode number 292. Today's podcast is brought to you by Mainlight, your go-to dry hire rental provider, bringing you the latest in lighting and stage equipment. From moving lights and control consoles to truss, LEDs, and rugged IP65 rated fixtures built for outdoor venues, they have everything you need to make your production shine, whether it be a small theater venue, an outdoor stadium event, or a television production set. Mainlight is the partner you trust with the gear you want. In addition to rentals, Mainlight offers a new equipment sales from all of your favorite brands, as well as used sales on equipment pulled directly from their rental inventory. All used equipment is meticulously maintained and backed by a 60-day depot warranty, ensuring you can have confidence in every purchase. With 4 strategically located facilities, Mainlight in Teterboro, New Jersey, Wilmington, Delaware, Nashville, Tennessee, and Las Vegas, Nevada, you get the reach of a national company with the personalized service of a local provider. Visit mainlight.com today to explore their rental options and request a direct quote through their easy-to-use platform. Episode 292. Here we are. And so if you haven't already, please check out the first episode of our new Future Tech podcast. This one is really interesting and exciting. You may not have noticed while you were watching this episode, the first Future Tech episode, but it is fully AI generated. It's the first fully AI generated podcast that I'm aware of in our industry. And it is entirely focused on new products and news, press releases, product releases, etc. So instead of sitting and reading a paper magazine or, scrolling on your phone and reading these press releases or product announcements, you can now actually listen to them. You can listen to them in your car. There's not really much to watch. You'll see a logo. That's about it. So listening is probably the preferred method on this one. But It is. It's an awesome format. I'm really proud of it. We're really excited to get this growing quickly, and I think it's going to become the preferred method of learning about new products going forward. So please listen, support it, share it, subscribe to it, etc. And I hope you like it. I hope you find it as fun as we do. And I'm still shocked about episode 286. You know, I listened back to some parts of it the other day. I'm a little bit embarrassed, but, you know, I shouldn't be, because I do the same thing to people every week on the podcast. You know, I look for facts from their past and stuff. So, but in this one, they just got me. I wasn't prepared for it. Like, I didn't have notes or thoughts or anything. It was just like, boom, you know, tell us about your life. And so they definitely got me. And now Sarah thinks she's being smart by posting all these old pictures of me on socials. And don't worry, Sarah, I have a very long memory, and I love to get back at people. So work is underway to put Sarah into the spotlight at some point in the future. We'll see when that happens. It'll be when you least expect it, I promise. And so, yeah, back to this AI podcast. One of the things I did want to point out is as I said, Future Tech is totally AI, and we're not really promoting that on the podcast, but we're certainly not hiding it. We're not trying to dupe people or trick people into listening an AI podcast and that they think is hosted. Like, people have told me we should create Facebook pages for the hosts and create these fictitious characters and all this stuff. Sounds fun, but it felt deceptive to me, so I didn't really want to do it. But we used several tools. We used a proprietary tool to really create the podcast, but we used some widely available tools like Suno for the music. The music for the podcast was created on Suno by me, and it wasn't like a 30-second thing. I went through probably 200 iterations of that song and finally settled on the one that we've got. Some might say 200 iterations and you picked that one. Don't ask me why, I just did. And used a part of ChatGPT to create the Future Tech logo. And I think we used Claude to script it. And so, you know, a lot of stuff is being used in the background to make it come out as clean and nice as it does. So I hope you'll take a listen to it, understanding that it is a completely AI-generated podcast. And it's still fun to listen to. I mean, that's the crazy part. It doesn't sound like AI. You know, I'm certainly positive that I could have duped a lot of you into not knowing it was AI, but it's AI. So enjoy that one. And so today's guest is a gentleman who Sarah says I met, but I don't recall meeting. So I'm going to be interested to find out if that's the case or not. Chris Chalky Chalk, hailing from Perth, Western Australia. Chris discovered his passion for production lighting during high school, sparking a career that began with an advanced diploma of performing arts in lighting at WAAPA, WAAPA, in 2000, and an internship at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. After joining the festival as a lighting technician in 2003, he transitioned to film lighting in 2005, launching a successful career in the industry. Chris has worked on acclaimed productions for WandaVision, Perry Mason, and Twin Peaks. With a foundation in theatrical lighting, Chris specializes in systems design and programming, known for his creative on-set solutions. In 2024, he returned to Australia as sales and marketing manager at Omegatech, continuing his innovative work in the field. And I'm also looking forward to talking to him about his controls business. So please join me and welcome Chris Chalky Chalk.
How are you, Chris? Should I call you Chris or Chalky?
Chris is fine.
All right. As we get older, those nicknames seem to drop off a little bit for some of us.
Mine hasn't. It's still
Oh, really?
it's still pretty relevant.
We always talk about these like touring nicknames and stuff, and you know, some of them, I think the guys want them to go away. Like, I don't know if you know James Poop.
No,
you don't know Poop. His name is his last name is Poping, James Poping. And so I don't know, his nickname ended up being Poop. That one you kind of want to drop off, you know?
Yeah, that's a little unfortunate.
Yeah. Or if you have a nickname like Pedophile or something, you probably want that one to go away pretty quickly. No, that's not a good one to have.
I was kind of born into mine because my last name's Chalk, so it's just kind of stuck.
Pretty easy.
Since I was a kid, everyone called me Chalky. Although when I was a kid, I was a little Chalky, and my dad was big Chalky. I mean, even to this day, I'm still a little Chalky, even though I'm 6 inches taller than my dad.
That's funny, isn't it?
But
that's funny. But mine, I never really got one because my last name's Fairbairn, and so oftentimes in school it was Fart Brain or like just dumb shit that you could make up out of that name. But there was never one that really stuck to me, thankfully.
I think the most unfortunate one I got was Duster. People would call me Duster.
Yeah. What did that mean?
Like the dusters on the, your teacher taking
I get it.
Duster.
I get it. Yeah.
That was the worst one I ever got. So,
yeah. So, we were talking in the pre-thing here about your trip up to Calgary last year to go to a Mustang event. I wish I would have known about it because I would have actually. My house is like an hour and 20 minutes or something from Calgary, so
it's pretty cool. It's called the International Mustang Meet, and it travels each year between the US and Canada because it's either hosted by an American club or a Canadian club. And I've gone to several of them over the years. I think this year was the 45th one or something. It's been going for a long time.
Wow.
And I have a Mustang that's currently stored in Seattle, and I have friends up there that have a resto shop, and so there's about 6 of us, pulled our Mustangs out. I have a 84 SVO, which is a rare Fox body car in the fact that it's not a 5-liter V8, it's a 2.3-liter turbo, so it's a fuel injected turbo. Yeah, and they only made it for like 3 years, and they made less than 10,000 of them. And mine's especially rare because it's got the removable glass roof, T-top roof, which it wasn't. They weren't. It's a bit of a unicorn because they didn't actually build them officially that way from the factory. You couldn't order it that way, but there are about 30 of them that I think were built with it, and that's one of those 30. And I bought it in, I think, 2008 out of someone's backyard in Fresno, and the motor was in a shed and the gearbox was missing and all the front sheet metal was gone, and I paid like $300 for it. I spent God knows how much money on it, but now it's a trophy winning show car. So
that's wild.
Yeah, it took me a long time. But it's something that I'm interested in doing. I like fixing broken things or making things. So
yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of money in it now too. If you can find the broken car, there's certainly a lot of money in these. And like I like the resto mods where you get a 66 Corvette with a a new crate engine in it and air conditioning and a good stereo and comfortable seats and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I love that kind of stuff. I don't like when they take like 2010 Corvette and turn it into a 60-something Corvette. That looks stupid.
It's a bit goofy.
But when they update old cars, I really love those. Camaros are another one that I love. The Resto Mod Camaros.
I mean, I love old old Corvettes and old Aussie Falcons and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, and you get in one of those these days, and it's just like the seating's terrible. The steering feels like this, like you're driving a boat. Yeah, and there's no air conditioning, and I kind of reckon like a car's something that you're supposed to enjoy. So if you have to, unless it's like a super rare car or something like that, that should be in the museum. Like modify it a bit to make it more comfortable. Like, put good brakes on it, put good steering on it, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's changed a lot and continues to change. It seems like, in the past, like if you had a 60s Corvette that you modified like that, it was suddenly valueless. And nobody wanted it. But now the thing is, people like me and you, we actually want to drive the car. We don't want to just have a show car sitting in the garage somewhere.
Right.
I want to take it out on weekends and drive it around and have fun, And
I mean, there's a certain segment of the market that wants it to be like totally original, and I've gotten into that. There are certain cars where I would like, okay, I know that bolt has to be that color and that bolt and restoring my car, I was originally going to restore it to concourse condition. So I can tell you the part numbers, every bolt in the car and what color they're supposed to be and where they, like, it's real nerd shit.
Yeah. I just spent a weekend, a friend of mine actually the guy who built my house up in Canada, I became very friendly with him, and he's my best buddy up there most days. But he's a car guy like I've never even known. Like this guy, if you told him about your car, he'd go, "Oh yeah, there were only 10,000 of those, and there was 30 who had that roof, and you got one of those 30." Like he knows every stat, every spec, every stock color, everything about every car in the 60s and most of the 70s as well. And I've never met anybody like this guy. He's a walking encyclopedia for real. And so I just spent a weekend with him. Him and his wife are in Naples, Florida, and my girlfriend and I went over and hung out with them for a few days. But while the Mecum auction's on, so we're sitting watching these cars, and he's telling me the history of every car and all this stuff. It's just wild. Like I've always
it's fun stuff.
Been a fan, but not an enthusiast. I guess I would say of old cars like that.
It was interesting for me because with my Mustang, it was at the time it was something that was affordable because I had one before that which I bought fairly cheap and then spent a lot of money on and then crashed, and that's a whole other story. But they weren't really expensive, and that was maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah.
There was one same car as mine, not without the roof, but an SVO that sold at Mecum last week for $37,000, which was unheard of.
Yeah.
So they're all starting to go up. It's that thing. You reach a certain age, and the car that you were in love with as a teenager is the thing you want, and now you've got money, and so you can buy it. So
no,
people
it
are willing to spend the money.
Guitars. It's happened to cars. It'll happen to everything, like toys. There's people paying huge money for like original metal Tonka trucks, because you can't get them. They're all plastic, made in freaking Malaysia or something now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a '92 Gibson Explorer that I used to play semi-professionally. That's been sitting in the case for the last 10 years, and I'd hate to think, I bought it brand new. Hate to think what that thing's worth these days, let alone 70s Les Pauls or late 60s Les Pauls. It's all that stuff's just.
Well, it seems to have, I don't know, I'm not paying a huge amount of attention. I'm paying attention only because in 2007, I think, 6, I bought, I don't know if you heard the story, but Guitar Center bought the Eric Clapton Blackie Strat, the Strat, the guitar that he played, that he recorded like Cocaine and all his huge hits were recorded on Blackie. And so they bought it for $1 million at an auction. And so instead of just putting it back up for sale or whatever, they made a deal with Fender, and they put it into their custom shop and had them just completely reverse engineer every single part of that guitar. The wiring, the content of the wiring, the shape of the wiring, the condition of the wiring, like every cigarette burn, every worn piece, like even the stickers on the case have the same scratches that the stickers on Eric Clapton's case had, right?
Real nerd stuff.
And so they only made, I think they made 200 of them or 225 of them or something, and they sold them for $20,000 each. And I had a friend in a pretty high place at Guitar Center because they were hard to get. Like there was only 250 of them, and or 225, I think it was. And so I was able to get 2 of them. So I bought 2, and I sold the first one almost immediately after the auction, within a few months after the auction, or after the sale of the units, for like $30,000. And I decided to keep the other one, and I've never played it. It sits in the case. It hung on my wall at my old house before I got divorced. And now it sits in the case literally under my bed. And I hope none of my neighbors are listening and break into my house and take it. But and I every once in a while I'll pop it up on Reverb for a couple of months and just see if anything happens. But it just seems to have stagnated, and I don't know if people are literally waiting for Eric Clapton to pass away or what it is. I don't know.
I mean, maybe. I mean, I would think when he does pass, the value on that's going to go up. It's the same thing, you know. You would think. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. They, you know, Kirk Hammett from Metallica bought Peter Green's Les Paul, for some ungodly known amount of money. I mean, you know, 59 Les Pauls have always been, you know, pretty much the top of the market anyway. But yeah, he bought it, and then, you know, within 6 months, Gibson released an exact replica of it from the custom shop. And I don't, you know, they were 20-25 grand a piece, whatever they were. And I was just like, I mean, I'm not spending that kind of money, but, you know, it's cool.
Yeah.
You know, so there's definitely an interest in it.
Well, here's the thing. Like I said, I never played it. I played it once. And, but I bought a guitar, a Relic Strat. So it's basically, it's like a 61 or 62 Strat made by a guy in Seattle called Nash Guitars. Yeah. And it's what he specializes in. The guy makes a Strat, I know he makes a Telly. And
I know his work. It's good stuff.
That Strat, so at the time I owned a part of a guitar store in Kelowna, British Columbia. And so at dealer cost, that Strat cost me like $1,200 or something. I'm telling you, it's the nicest early 60s Strat that I've ever touched in my life. And for me, it smokes that Blackie. It's just such a nicer neck, nicer guitar than the Blackie. So whenever I do feel like playing, I'm actually a bass player. I'm not even a guitar player, but whenever I feel like playing a guitar, I'll grab that Nash guitar, and I just love it. It's like butter.
It's funny.
I've a nice guitar.
I've always been a Gibson guy. You know, I've had my Explorer forever. I've had several Les Pauls, although I was always a fan of like the mid-70s Ibanez, you know, the Ibanez Lawsuit. Great guitars, really good guitars.
Yeah, really good guitars.
And I've only ever
I was an Ibanez dealer back then.
Yeah, right. No, they were just a nice guitar. They sounded good. Yeah. I mean, you put better pickups in them, but whatever. I've only ever owned one Fender, and it was Dave Murray from Iron Maiden had a black Strat that was originally owned by Paul Kossoff. And it's known in, you know, lore as Dave Murray's Kossoff Strat. And there was a guy in Canada that used to make guitars that were played by Adrian Smith in the early 80s. I can't remember the guy's name. But I found a black Fender Strat that was it was made by that guy, and it was an exact replica of Dave Murray's Kossoff Strat. And it was a beautiful guitar. Yeah, it was a beautiful guitar. It played amazingly, and it sounded fantastic. But I could just never get around the Fender thing. I'm just, you know, like I'm
if you're a Les Paul guy, it just doesn't feel right. And see, I've never liked Les Pauls. Like the neck just feels chunky and gross to me. I like smaller, smoother. I don't know. I was always
a fan of the smaller custom necks. The standard necks tend to be a bit thick, but the custom necks nice and thin. But yeah, that Kossoff Strat sounded amazing, but I just couldn't get around it. So
yeah,
back to
weird.
the
And I've
always,
I've always liked to play like, Fender Precision basses and that style of a bass. Like I was obviously growing up in Canada, being a singer and a bass player. I was a huge Geddy Lee fan, and so anytime he bought something, I had to have it. So I had a bunch of Rickenbackers. Right. I tried the Steinberger when he went that direction, and I just couldn't groove on a little tiny rectangular thing with no head on it. It just beautiful instrument, but didn't work for me.
It's interesting. Tell me if you get the parallel here. So, you ever driven a Tesla?
I have. Felt like driving an iPhone.
I always, yes, exactly. That's the same thing I say. Like if like everyone's like, you ever driven a Tesla? I'm like, yeah, it's like driving a toaster oven.
Yeah, it's just got no spirit. It's fast as shit.
Yeah.
But it's just got no spirit. Yeah, it feels,
no character.
To me, it just felt like an iPhone. Like it's perfect in every way, but it's boring.
And that's probably what the Steinberg felt like as well.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. Didn't even go out of tune because it had that special tuning system and stuff, like it's like you could do anything to it and it would just be like, thank you, sir. So, like,
I was going to say, you're originally from Canada, right?
Yeah.
You're a fan of the Tea Party?
The Tea Party.
Yeah, Canadian trio.
No, I don't.
Bands.
They might have been after I left already. It's like Tragically Hip. Tragically Hip was after I left in 1991, and Tragically Hip happened after that. And so people always were like, "Oh my God, how much do you love Tragically Hip?" And I'm like, "I've never even heard them. I haven't heard a single song." And since then, I have, of course, but I'm still not a fan.
The Tea Party is kind of like call it more like a Moroccan roll.
Oh, really?
It's kind of like a bit like Led Zeppelin meets the Doors.
I would love
really,
that.
really good.
Yeah,
but their guitar player is one of those guys that like everything's open tunings and modal tunings and all this sort of stuff, and he'll change guitars every song when they're playing live. But he has this really cool Les Paul, which has got this thing called a trans performance system in it, and basically it's this whole series of electric motors and specialty stuff, and basically you can record a bunch of tunings into the guitar, and you push a button, and it will instantly retune the guitar to that tuning.
Oh,
so say you want to go from open C to open G, you can just push a button and it'll do it. And I guess Jimmy Page had one as well. But the idea is like, the chorus is in open C, the verse is in open G. You just like push the button and you're in that tuning, and then you just crazy tech.
You don't have to do anything with your left hand. You just sit there and go like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah, no,
cool.
I'm probably quite a bit older than you, and so for me it was Triumph. It was like in Canada, it was Triumph. It was April Wine. Gatto, which actually remarkably is our intro song on the podcast, is a song by a Canadian trio called Gatto from the 70s and 80s. And actually, he's still out touring, doing shows right now. He's a good friend of mine now and gave us the song for the intro. But
that's cool.
But yeah, I mean, that was more like, for me, it was Rush, Triumph, Saga. You can tell what direction I was going with some of my music there was very progressive. And that kind of stuff. And then, eventually like Loverboy and some of the other newer bands that came out of Canada as well. But yeah, I really was brought up on Rush and Led Zeppelin and that kind of stuff. So some of the newer Canadian bands I never got to hear because I just wasn't around. So Well, when I'm up in Canada for the summers now, I try to listen to some Canadian programming. Like I'll force myself in the car, even if I've got satellite radio and stuff. I'll listen to local radio just to hear some new Canadian content.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
very cool.
So we've already gone off the rails here, and we've talked about cars, we've talked about guitars, talked about music. Not a word about lighting yet. So
no, we'll get there.
You've got an interesting history in that I believe you were born in Australia.
Yep.
And grew up
born and grew up in Perth, Western Australia, which, it's the most isolated capital city in the world. A lot of people don't sort of understand the geography of Australia. And they're like, "Oh, you're from Sydney." I'm like, "No, I'm from Perth on the West Coast." "Where's that?" I'm like, "Okay, well, if you imagine the US, Sydney's New York, Perth is LA." And like, "Oh, is it like the same distance?" I'm like, "Yep." They're like, "Australia's really big." I'm like, "Yep."
Yeah, it's wild, isn't it? Because you think of it as an island, it's got to be tiny, of course, right? But it's really not. It's funny because a little less diplomatic. I had a friend not really a friend. He was in my circle in Western Canada when I was in the music business there and playing in bands, and then ultimately I went to work for and own music stores for a little while. And but he was a musician and a drug dealer. And I think the government of Canada were pursuing him, and he moved to Australia, and he ended up in Perth for a number of years. And he says, "Marcel, it's the fucking shithole of the planet. This place sucked."
Really?
Yeah, he hated Perth. He just couldn't stand it. And it had something to do with, I believe, the culture. Like he just didn't fit in. Long hair, freaky dude. Very Canadian. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but that was always my only vision of Perth was what he said, because I've never been there. So, but it's a great place.
Yeah, I grew up here. It's pretty chill. It's laid back. The beaches are beautiful. There's good surfing. When I was growing up here, it felt like this really sort of isolated little country town.
Yeah,
which
probably one of the. I like that vibe.
I like that. Maybe now. I didn't like it so much when I was 20.
Yeah, maybe they just didn't like runaway drug dealers from Canada.
Maybe.
Maybe that's what it was. I think
maybe all the local drug dealers didn't make him feel welcome.
Right, exactly. He was a hard guy to get along with as it was. So I wasn't that shocked that he had a hard time getting on with that place. But yeah. So anyways, so you grew up in Perth?
Yeah, I grew up in Perth. And it was one of those things. I was like in high school, I was like a lunchtime library nerd. I was, like I wasn't really into sports all that much, and I was more interested in sort of, art stuff and reading. And then my school built a new theater, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And then there was this big board with buttons on it that made lights turn on. I'm like, oh, this is different. What's this? How does this work? And so I started playing around with it, and that sort of became my lunchtime thing. Instead of going to the library, I started playing with the lights in the theater. And my teacher was like, oh, it seems like you're kind of into this. I'm like, yeah, this is cool. You can do all this stuff. And she said, I've got a friend that's doing a production at a theater in the city, and they're looking for someone to give them a hand. And
okay, so we had a little minor host crash over here. My computer just kind of pulled one of these to me, and
time for an upgrade.
Yeah, said, unfortunately, I can't even blame that. I upgrade so often. So,
oh, there you go.
But anyways, you were talking about, basically being introduced to lighting when you were, I believe, in high school in Perth. And,
yeah. So, like I said, I started playing around in the theater at lunchtime. I was kind of like, oh, this is cool, and I can do these things. I can make it look different. And my drama teacher was like, oh, you seem like you're into this. And she's like, I've got a friend that's doing a show in the city, and they're looking for an extra person to help out. And I was like, oh, cool. And like 16 at the time or something. And it was like working as a stagehand. So like moving props and moving furniture. And I was like, oh, I haven't done this before. I'll have a go at this. And I walk in the first day, and it's a production of Cabaret. And there are 12 girls in corsets and fishnets. And I went, this is the job for me.
Yeah,
no, I mean, it wasn't just that. I mean, I just loved, I was very lucky in the fact that my mum was a teacher, and she was always sort of dragging me to the ballet or taking me to a play or taking me to an art gallery and things like that. So I'd already sort of been immersed in the arts, and then the opportunity to work in it was really cool. And so I had planned, I did that show, and then I finished high school, and I planned to go to the WA Academy of Performing Arts, which is here in Perth. And I applied to go there and do lighting design. And they had a policy back then. They didn't take kids straight out of school. So I went and got a day job, and I said, oh, I'll just take a gap year and then I'll apply again. But then I went and got a job, and I'm like, oh, I'm making money. I can afford that hot rod that I've always wanted. And that's that thing and that thing. And so,
money can be quite alluring when you're, when you're a starving lighting, theatrical lighting guy or musician.
Yeah. And
were
so,
you a musician first or a lighting person first?
Bit of both. I started playing guitar in my teens, and then started playing with lighting in my teens. So come the time I'm 17, 18, I'm still playing around, playing music and playing with lighting. And then in my early 20s, I got more serious with it and was playing semi-professionally. And, I'd go to gigs, and there'd be, like a sound engineer and then this lighting console and no one there to do anything with it. And I was like, can I do that? And they went, yeah. So I just started playing around, and people were like, oh, you're pretty good at this. And then people actually started paying me to do the lighting for their bands. And I was like, oh, this is fun. And so that kind of became the thing I did on the weekend when I didn't have gigs. I would go out and do light shows for people. And then after about 6 years of doing my day job, I was kind of like, why don't I look at doing this lighting thing again? Yeah. So at 26 or 27, I applied for WAAPA again and got in. One of and it's interesting. It's WAAPA is interesting because it's run like a professional theatre company. So, it's a 3-year. Well, when I did it was a 3-year course. I think it's 4 now. They'll take 10 people in lighting, 10 people in sound, 10 people in costume design, 10 people in set design, and all the departments.
I find it interesting though that you're in your mid-20s, you're already working as a lighting person,
right?
Yet it's important to you to go back and get this degree. And so what was the thought process there? Like, was it because you didn't think you could get certain jobs without that degree, or was it like, I'm just curious because Most people who are already working in that field wouldn't go back and get that degree after the fact.
Well, I wasn't working professionally. Like I wasn't working for a rental house or
I see.
People were paying me to do lights for their bands, but it wasn't like, I was working for a production company. I was just, someone had seen me do a gig at a pub and be like, hey man, can you come and do ours? So I wasn't aware of the pathway of like, hey, look up,
awareness.
Production.
Yeah, that's a good point right there. Is because nowadays, like for sure, you could just walk into a rental company and say, hey, I've done some gigs. Yeah. Can I clean your shop? And it might be a shorter path, maybe more painful. I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You think about the pathways that you could have taken, and in fact, me going to WAAPA a huge part of got me to where I am.
Wow.
So yeah, I went to WAAPA, studied lighting design because I always have a passion for learning things. And like I said, it's a university, but they run it like a theater. So 6 times a year, they do this 2-week production slot, and it's 2 weeks of 14-hour days. Like week 1, you bump the show and you build the show, you do tech, you do rehearsals, you do all that sort of stuff. And the second week is performances. And you do that 6 times a year. And it's like, you might work on, in 1 year, you might work on, 2 theater pieces, a musical theater production, an opera, a film, and a, like a musical. All these varied things. And in fact, one of my favorite ones to do the whole time was opera, because those opera kids know how to party, man. They're crazy.
You wouldn't think.
But, but it was fun. And so like, it was really like, you really get immersed in, like when you're a first year, you start off just as an electrician, and then, first year, second year, you start to board up. Third, second year, you start to do some designing stuff. And in the meantime, you're doing, design classes, electronics classes, history of theater, history of art, all this sort of stuff. There was one class we did on like script analysis, which you wouldn't think, script analysis, whatever. But as I got further in my career, I'm like, this is actually really helpful. So, and it's the same thing like the day job that I had. I started out, sweeping the warehouse, and then got into inventory control, and then into sales, and then into management. And it was kind of like, okay, 30 years later, I can look back and go, hang on, this skill that I'm using today, I learned in that first job.
Wow,
so it's interesting. But yeah, so I did my 3 years at WAAPA, and then, and some great experiences, worked on some amazing stuff, really got to push the boundaries of what design is, how it works, learn the ins and outs of it, and have a safe training ground to be like, I really want to try this thing. And okay, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Okay, here's why it didn't work. Take that, move on. And then in the next design thing, go, what about this? Okay, now it works. Like it's joining all those links. And, like I do have a lighting design degree, but I haven't actually done a huge amount of lighting design as a professional. I've certainly used that skill set since I've been working in the film industry, but like
it's a discipline too, right? It's a discipline.
Yeah.
It's like it's learning the right ways to do things doesn't mean every time you do it you're going to do it that way, but right from wrong, and you are disciplined, and you have been through that process, and and you've got the card to prove it.
Yeah.
But they were very specific to theater lighting, right? It was very much a theater.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you covered all the major, theater, musical theater, dance. You learned the difference between, backlight, front light, side light, the different places you use different kinds of lighting and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, so it all applies.
They did do a couple of, every year they would do like a film project. And I worked on a couple of the film projects, and I didn't really think it was something I was very interested in. I mean, I originally wanted to be a Verilight tech. That's what I wanted.
Really?
I was into the nerdy stuff. Yeah. I wanted to be a Verilight tech and tour with Maiden or something like that.
Yeah. And you
still could.
Yeah.
Although they don't need as many
Verilight.
I could get into that.
They don't need as many Verilight techs as they used to, but
no.
But you certainly could. Iron Maiden are still touring, shockingly.
Yeah. When I was at WAAPA, I started working on local crews. A big tour would come into town, and they'd need, guys to load in and guys to run follow spots. Like that's how I met Cosmo. Just all these interesting experiences working on these big shows and seeing all this stuff and it's like, oh, cool. And, like I said, I met Cosmo on an AC/DC tour and I go front of house to do something in Perth. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I actually saw him at LDI this year or last year. And I was like, hey man, I don't know if we met in person a very long time ago. I was spot number 3 in Perth. And he's like, oh yeah, cool. And, and he's saying he's going to be over here later this year. But, I went front of house with him and I'd never seen like an Icon console before. This is back in the day. Yeah. I'm like, oh, what's this thing? He says, oh, it's an Icon. And I was like, oh, why do you use that? And he says, oh, it's the only thing that'll run Icons. And I went, okay, fair enough.
And that makes sense.
I had some cool experiences like that. And then part of the third year, you had to go and do an internship with a professional company. And there was a few guys that sort of went to the Sydney Opera House and went to, big production companies on the East Coast. And, but my mum had a friend, who worked at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival in Ashland in Southern Oregon. It's this tiny little town of maybe about 25,000 people. But they have the third biggest repertory theater company in America there. It's a Shakespeare festival that runs for 10 months and does nearly 800 performances in a season.
Jeez.
In 3 theaters. It's a big thing.
It's wild.
And it was one of those things. This lady had come to visit Mum in Australia and do some workshops on Shakespeare. And we were having dinner one night and I was telling her about this internship that I had to do. And she's like, well, you should call up the master electrician and come and do it at the festival. I'm like, yeah, that's going to happen. And sure enough, I called him. I was like, hey man, I got told to give you a call. He's like, yeah, when do you want to be here? July?
Yeah.
And sure enough, I went to Ashland for 6 weeks and did an internship there. And it was amazing.
That's cool.
It's just an amazing level of professional theater, like the likes of.
Was that your first time over to the U.S.?
That was in July 2000. It was my first trip over. Yeah, it was pretty cool. And like I said, I had a blast. Beautiful place, great people, great work, really good work.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, they were like, hey man, if you ever end up back here, we've got a job for you. Okay. So I went back to Perth, and I met a girl while I was there. These things sometimes happen. So I went back to Perth and I was doing my thing and, graduated. Actually I was supposed to, at the end of every season or the end of every year, they take the graduating performance class on the showcase tour. And I'd actually, it was a real fight to be the LD on showcase. And I'd actually been chosen to do it that year.
Oh, wow.
But one of the previous productions I'd done in our production slots was one of the film projects. And it had turned out like I hadn't really thought I'd be interested in working on film, but I worked on this film and it was really cool. And the director of photography was really cool. And he was into motorcycles. I was into motorcycles. We talked about motorcycles a lot. And he was really open and willing to talk to me about the process and what we were doing and how things were happening. And a lot of the production team that they would bring in for those film things were professionals from the industry in Perth. And apparently I made an impression because it was about 3 months before my course was due to end. And I got a phone call from one of the guys that had been working as a producer on our student film. And he's like, hey, there's a big movie coming to town and they need another electrician. Would you be interested in working on it? And I went, well, I'm still at uni. I don't think I can. And he said, well, go and ask your lecturers and see if they'll let you do it. So I went and I said, hey, look, I've been offered this opportunity. I know I'm supposed to be doing showcase. And they were both like, listen, man, it's a $10 million movie. You go and do it. You have our blessing, go.
That's amazing.
So, yeah. So it was cool because I got to go and work on this professional, like multi-million-dollar budget movie. I hadn't even graduated college yet. And I found, wow, this is a very different discipline from what I'm doing. But it's also really cool. It's different, and I sort of started to learn that there's a philosophy that I developed later on. One of the things I always liked about touring was you were at different places and different challenges and new things every day. And films are like that, a lot like that, but generally you get to sleep in your own bed every night, which is absolutely really nice.
That's a nice benefit, yeah.
Yeah, and the catering's pretty good, and the pay's not bad either. So, I went and did this film before I'd even graduated, and then I graduated, and I went and worked at local production companies. I would take shows out and do small regional tours, and I worked as a bench tech and a repair tech and a programmer, and I really had a few people sort of take me under their wing and teach me a lot about programming, which was really cool because obviously programming for live events is very, very different from, doing theater. I remember I was working on a show. I can't even remember what it was, but I remember the programmer. I don't remember his name, but the thing I remember about him was he always had Vegemite sandwiches, and he always carried like a gallon jug of milk. That was the only stuff I ever saw him eat.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Vegemite. This is a thing that you guys, I don't
Australian
get it.
thing.
Yeah,
No,
I just don't get it. I've tried it and went, it's not for me.
Yeah. It's an acquired taste. But he was running this big show, and he's running it on a whole hog too. And I was looking at his group layout, and I'm like, what's that all about? This is all over the place. He says, oh, that's my map. I went, what? He said, well, I lay my groups out in a way that it looks like the plot. So instead of looking at the plot, I just look at my groups and go, I want those ones. And I went, wow, that's really cool.
Seems pretty logical.
Yeah, and that's a philosophy that I then started using until, the adventation of, 2D plots or layout views or magic sheets or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, yeah.
Lay your groups out like the plot, and then you just go, oh yeah, done, moving on. It was just like, and there was a lot of instances like that where people gave me tidbits of information that really formed, how I process stuff now and think about it. And
it's a good point though that because I think a lot of people think you should get out of school and immediately go and design lighting for the Beatles reunion or something, right? But the thing is, you have to work for some great designers to build your entire toolbox. Like, school isn't going to teach you exactly what it's like in some sense. So, but honestly, like, again, I want to go back to this idea of school.
Yep.
I was one that jumped out of school because I just thought I was smart enough and didn't need it, and I wanted to do things my way. And I'm not saying that's the right way for young people to do it these days. Maybe, maybe not. But you were very committed to completing school. Like, you got this opportunity in Oregon. You did the internship. They offered you a gig. And you said, okay, maybe once I'm done school. It was always school first and everything else second. And it blows me away how committed you were to it. Like, did that have something to do with your parents? Did your parents push you really? You better finish your degree first.
No, no, not really. Yeah. I mean, Mum was a teacher, and she also, she did a master's degree. She had a doctorate in philosophy. My dad was actually a master sheet metal worker.
Yeah.
Like, you give him a piece of steel and a drawing, he can make anything.
Yeah. Funny that the two of them really shaped who you've become, though. If you think about it. Yeah.
Well, and it's ironic, because my mum was always like, oh, you'd make a really good teacher. And now that's a big part of what I do.
Yeah.
No, I just think I very much like to start things and finish them.
Yeah.
And just take on board that you start on a path and you're never quite going to learn exactly where it takes you until you finish it. You know what I mean? And so I think it's just something that I was really enjoying doing. I was enjoying the experience. I was working with cool people. I mean, my head lecturer at the time was one of the best LDs in the country.
Yeah.
And so, it was like, it was astounding to me. Like, the first 6 months I was there, he'd come up to me and be like, we're not going too slow for you, eh? I'm like, nah, man, you just do you. I'm just sitting here soaking it all in,
That's great. Yeah.
And
again, I'm not bagging on school at all, because again, I chose a different path, and it served me well. But in a lot of situations, I think that young people become professional students because it seems to be the easier path in some cases. I look at a lot of students who are rotting away and could do very well if they just jumped in head first and went and did that thing instead of learning about that thing. But I think there's two sides to it, and I'm not putting down your commitment to school. I'm actually very appreciative and in awe of your commitment to finishing, because you got offered some cool things, but it was always back to, like you said, this movie. You had to go and ask your professors first if you could do it.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, and luckily they were very supportive of it. I think they recognized a little bit of talent there and just a commitment to the craft. And they just sort of opened doors for me. I think they sort of were like, well, there's not much else we can teach you here. Go and learn this other thing from these other people. And I met some people on there that I'm still in contact with, which is amazing. But I always sort of looked at school as a pathway and an opportunity to learn stuff and grow, and realizing that I think, I already had a bit of natural talent, not to sound, just my ability to visualize things.
It sounds like it. I mean, and those who get offered the best opportunities are usually the ones who are recognized with that talent, whether you're a lighting person or a racing driver or a movie star or whatever it is. Like, if you're good, people are going to find you.
Yeah, someone sees something in you and they either want to foster that or they want to use it to their advantage, which is fine, because you can do that and I'm still going to learn something from it. But I mean, school was cool and it opened some doors. Like, it got me to America, for God's sake. So I don't regret that at all. But so I finished school, and then I did a couple years in Perth, and then, things with the girl in America got a bit more serious. So I ended up going back there for a bit, and then she moved to Australia, and then we got married, and it was like, she was like, I really want to be back home. And I went, okay, well, I know I've got a job there if I want it, because she lived in Ashland. So we moved back to Ashland, and I worked at the Shakespeare Festival for 3 years. And it was really good. And like I said, amazing work, but rep theatre is one of those things where you go in and you do it and you do it and you do it and you do it every day and you do it. And I was just like, I just got I wanted to be like pushing the envelope and learning new things and changing. And as seems to have happened in a lot of my career, one day I was in my apartment and I went out the back and I see a line of trucks parked across the street. And I went, that looks like a film crew. So I walked across the street and they were shooting at a restaurant there. And I sort of stood there on the curb and I went, okay, that's the best boy. That's the group. That's the DP. That's the gaffer. Who's everyone else? And I waited. I looked around all the trucks and I went, okay, this is the lighting truck. So I just stood there at the gate and I waited for this guy to walk out of the gate or walk out of the set and walk up onto the truck. And I just walked up on the tailgate and I went, g'day, I'm Chalky. How you going, mate? And he's like, oh, you're Australian. I went, yeah. Sometimes being Australian will work to your advantage. So,
the accent gets their attention.
Yeah, exactly. So I got talking to him. I was like, hey, man, like I work at the Shakespeare Festival. I'm a lighting tech. I'm a programmer. And, I did a bit of film work in Australia. If you guys ever need a hand, give me a call. So I gave him my number and thought, he's probably not going to call, but okay. A couple of months later, I get a phone call. It's like, hey, man, we're doing this little movie in town and we need another guy. Yeah, cool. Well, it just happens to fall right into the off season of the Shakespeare Festival.
Yeah.
So,
perfect.
OSF had like a 10-week hiatus. This was an 8-week movie that happened to slot right in the middle.
Yeah. Wow.
Sometimes you get lucky.
Incredible.
So I'm like, okay, cool. So I rock up, and I haven't ever worked on a movie in America. All of the power stuff's different. All of the connection types are different. I'm just like, okay. I'm like trying to learn it all in the first week.
Yeah.
And at the end of the first week, the gaffer gets into a fight with the production manager. He gets fired. The best boy quits. And the third electrician says, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go and be a grip. So I'm the last guy standing, and I'm like, this is my first time.
Holy shit.
So they bring in this crew of guys from Portland, none of whom I'd ever met. And they're like, who are you? And I'm like, I'm the new guy. I don't really know. And I thought, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. And I thought I was on thin ice. And then, second or third day, I get it to the truck. I put my radio on and and it's pandemonium. There's like pandemonium happening. And I'm like, hey, what's going on, fellas? They're like, we're in a theater. There's a tour board. And I'm like, right, here we go. Where is it? And they're like, it's up there. Panic stations. I walk up. It's like an old ETC Express or something. I'm like, what do you want to see, fellas? And they're like, oh, and I'm like, okay. How's that? champagne falls from the heavens. I'm suddenly the it guy.
Wow.
And
that's amazing.
And within 3 months, I was living in Portland, Oregon, working on a Morgan Freeman movie.
Jesus, that's incredible.
It was one of those things. I worked with those guys for actually it was more than 3 months. I worked with those guys for the rest of that show, and it went really well. They were good guys. They taught me a lot. And then
was it Hollywood Lights or something? Who was it?
No, it was a bunch of freelance film guys out of Portland.
Okay.
But Hollywood Lights does come into the story later. So yeah, I did that show with them, and then they called me up for this other little thing that happened in Southern Oregon. And then they called me for something in Portland, and I was like 4 weeks. I'm like, eh. Then they called me another one that was like 6 weeks. I'm like, meh. Because, I was running 2 shows at OSF, which is a fairly big deal. And then they called me a third time and they said, hey, look, we got this movie. It's coming to Portland. It's 12 weeks. Morgan Freeman's in it. It's a big budget. We need a guy. And so at that point of the season, I was actually working for the stage operations crew, working backstage running shows. And I got the phone call on a Thursday afternoon. They wanted me to start the following Monday. So I called the head of stage ops, this guy called Tommy, who was formerly the master welder at OSF. He was also local 1, serious guy. I called him up. He was at a conference in Chicago. I called him up and said, hey man, I just got a call to go and join IATSE in Portland and work on a film for 12 weeks. He says, you're running 2 shows? I said, yep. He says, have you got shadows on both shows? I said, yep. Are they trained up? Yep. When do you need to leave? I said, they want me there Monday. He says, when's your last show? I said, Sunday. He said, okay, do both the shows this weekend, make sure everyone's up to speed, and fuck off. I'm like, you sure you're cool with this? He's like, yep. So I literally did my 2 shows. I did the shows. Actually, I had a show Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. I finished my show Sunday night. I had my stuff already packed in my car. Finished my show, got in my car, drove to Portland. Got into Portland about 3:30 in the morning, drove straight to crew parking, slept in my car for 2.5 hours, and then went and did my first day on a movie called The Feast of Love.
Wow.
Which was my sort of introduction into being a professional film lighting technician.
Jeez, that's incredible.
Yeah. Wow. And then that was in 2006, and then I worked in sort of Pacific Northwest, mostly Portland, Seattle, until sort of 2015 when I started working in LA. And it was cool because when I first started working in Portland, it was really sort of they did a few big features there. I mean, not Marvel big, but drama stuff. We did a couple of big movies there. I got to work with some big out of town gaffers, which was really cool. Like a program for Bill O'Leary, who's Roger Deakins' gaffer. Worked with him. I worked with another big guy called Jeff Morrell, who's most famous for doing a lot of Marvel stuff over the last 10, 15 years.
Cool.
And yeah, it was a really cool place to sort of cut my teeth and learn the chops and because programming for film and TV is very different for doing live event stuff. People ask me what's it like programming for film and TV. I'm like, tech? Yeah, that's the job. 5 days a week for however long you're on a show. Because there's no process of where, unless you're doing like a concert sequence or something like that, it's literally every shot is a different lighting setup, which is reprogrammed, and then you flip the world 180 degrees and it's a totally different look. So, unless you're doing a sequence where you have specific things that have to happen over a certain time frame, it's go, man. Like there's no rest. So what is it? Someone once described it to me as hours of sheer boredom interspersed with minutes of sheer panic. That's a film set.
Hilarious.
And that's quite often how it feels.
So by now, have you left the Shakespeare thing?
Basically in 2006, when I got the offer to go up to Portland and join IATSE and work in the film business, I basically resigned from the festival and then just got into film full time. As I was working on movies and TV shows and commercials up there, and for the first couple of years it was a bit thin on the ground. So I would sort of day play at Hollywood Lights as one of their techs and as a repair tech there as well. And then more and more it became the film work became more and more consistent for a period of time.
Yeah.
There was a couple of big TV shows that shot up there for a number of years. So the work was pretty consistent.
But LA's is the, it's the
well, I mean,
you want to be, right?
It is. Yeah. I mean, the thing that I found, I came from, when I was back in Perth, I was doing a lot of corporate gigs and we do moving light stuff and it was really fun. And then, up until sort of LEDs really started to come in, mid 2010s, it was, most film sets, sort of in Portland, at least, looking 2 or 3 universes of tungsten stuff at the most, some Kino stuff, but there wasn't really any LED at that stage. And I would find, I'm doing these cool shows in Portland and I'm making good money and it's fun. And I'm working with good people because there was quite a few guys in Portland and Seattle that had moved up from LA. They were all 728 guys that I was working with. So I learned a lot while I was there. But I got to a point where I'm like, I think I've learned as much as I can here.
Yeah.
And I would go and watch a big movie and you would always see the same names. It was always, Scott Barnes, Benoit Richard, Elton James, Josh Thatcher. Like I could pretty much watch a movie and go, I think Scotty did this. And sure enough, that was the name you would see on the screen. And I would see the stuff and be like, hey man, those guys are doing what I want to do, but they're all working out of LA. So, again, being in the right place at the right time. Like I said, I have a few friends that were living in Portland at the time that was 728. And one day I'm between sort of shows and I get a phone call from a friend of mine who's an Oregon resident, but he'd moved to LA 20 years ago, got into 728, was doing stuff there, and then moved back to Portland to be with his family. And he calls me and he's like, oh man, are you doing anything? Can you come and give us a hand? I'm working with this young gaffer from LA and it's this non-union show and it's me and him and an intern and like we're just getting buried. I'm like, yeah, cool man, I'll come give you a hand. So I go and give him a hand and I'm there for a couple of weeks helping him out. And this gaffer from LA was really, really cool and we got along quite well. And then, over the course of the next couple of years, he'd call me up. He'd be like, hey man, can you come to LA for a couple of weeks? Like, oh, listen man, I'm on a snowboarding vacation in Canada. Can you call me on the next one? Sorry, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the big thing is, to get into any of the Hollywood unions, you've got to do a number of qualifying days to be able to apply for membership. And like trying to get those days is a big thing. So to knock it back, I was like, yeah, okay, So he actually asked me a couple of times, and then in 2015, they were doing a new Twin Peaks, and a friend of mine was the best boy on that, and so he invited me to come up to Washington, up to Seattle for 6 or 8 weeks and work on that. And again, the gaffer was from LA, and I got along with him really, really well. And he's like, "Listen, man, I'd love to bring you to LA, but you're not 728." And I'm like, So I finished that, and I was actually at the time I was playing Australian football for the Portland Steelheads, which is an Australian rules football club based in Portland. And I was sitting at the airport. We were flying to.
You were playing for them.
Yeah, I was playing Australian rules. Playing Australian rules football.
Oh my God.
Yeah, at 36 or something. Anyway,
wow.
I was sitting at the airport, waiting to fly to Austin to go to the national titles, because there's 43 American Aussie rules clubs in the US. There's 43 of them, I think, and they have the national tournament every year, and so it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's fun to hang.
Brutal. I'm a hockey fan, and even I call it brutal. Yeah.
So I was still doing that in my late 30s, so it was fun. But I'm flying. I'm sitting at the airport waiting to fly to Austin to play footy, and I get a phone call from that young gaffer from LA, and he's like, "Hey man, what are you doing right now?" Well, I'm sitting at the airport. He's like, "Hey, I need a programmer for a show in LA. There's not a lot of money, but it's a union show, and there's 35 days. I can get you 30 days in one hit." I said, "When do you need me there?" He's like, "Tuesday." I'm like, "I'll be there." So literally, I fly to Austin for the weekend. I play my footy tournament. I fly back. I chuck my console in the back of the Mustang and a pack of bags, and I go. And so I went down to LA and I got my 35 days, which got me into 728. And It was funny, and it was this show it was like a YouTube original piece or something. And I hadn't really asked a lot of information when I just said, "Yep, 35 days, cool, I'm there." And so I walk in, and on the first day, they're like, so what kind of lights do you want to use? And I'm like, what? Well, they're like, we need to order lights for the show. What do you want to use? I'm like, well, what are we doing? And it ended up, it was a show, basically, they were taking the piss out of shows like American Idol. They were satiring singing competition shows. And I'm like, oh, you want me to design the rig? And they went, yeah. And I went, okay. So I just got out my Vectorworks and I just started drawing a plot. And I said, what do you guys think of this? And like, yeah, that's cool. And I think the first rig that I designed was going to cost them $70,000 a week or something. And they're like, well, we've only got 50. So it went from being, like the latest LED moving lights to, VL 2500s and Mac 2Ks, which was fine. It ended up working out really, really well. But it was one of those shows where, every day we would shoot for 12 hours a day with the company, and then me, the DP, and the gaffer would sit there from 6 until midnight programming the looks for the next day. And then we would come in and we would do that. And we did that for 3 weeks. And it was like, get your chops down, kid. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, here's 4 basic looks. Pick a color, pick a gobo. Right, moving on. Next. And we just had to crunch through it. Because we were programming 3 songs a night.
Yeah.
So it was pretty full on. But it was a really fun experience. And it got me into 728. And so I got my qualifying days for 728. And literally, I was still living in Portland at the time. And the day I actually flew down to get sworn into the union, I get a phone call, and it was the gaffer from Twin Peaks. He's like, hey man, you just got sworn into 728. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, we've got 8 weeks of stage work in LA. Do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah.
That's wild.
It just cascaded.
Huh? Yeah.
And so, originally my plan had been to move sort of back and forth between Portland, LA, pick up shows in both places so I could be at home more. But over a period of time, it just got busier and busier and busier in LA. To the point, I did 2 seasons of Hell's Kitchen in Vegas. I was in Vegas for like 3 or 4 months. I did Lady and the Tramp in Savannah, Georgia. I was there for 4 months. It was actually interesting. We'll probably talk a bit more about Benoit later, but there was a period
I was going to ask you, because you mentioned it somewhere in the notes that I got that meeting Ben Richard was a big deal.
Oh yeah, well, no, it was a huge deal for me because I remember, back in the day, like I said, I've always, once I got into film, but I've always had a love of concept lighting. Like one of the things that first got me into lighting, I remember this vividly, this is before I got into it, in the nerd high school era. I remember going to a concert, and as a kid, I was crazy about like fast cars and jet planes and steam trains and, like mechanical shit, things that did things.
Yeah.
And I went to a concert and I look up and I see all these lights and they look like jet engines. And I'm like, oh, jet lights. I want to work on jet lights.
Yeah.
That was, that's why I wanted to be a VL tech. I wanted to work on jet lights.
Yeah.
And I remember watching a bunch of concert videos, and then I remember watching, like it was Metallica S&M or something. And I was like, wow, that looks amazing. Who was the guy that did that? Ben Richards. Oh, okay. Who's that guy? I got to find out who he is. And then I remember going and seeing Metallica on some tour in Perth. They were playing at the entertainment center. And, I'm like standing there and, like you're waiting for the house lights to go down and suddenly some dudes start walking out on stage and start playing. And I'm like, what? Something must be wrong. Why are the house lights still on? Like Metallica's playing and the house lights.
I remember that tour. Yeah, I remember that tour.
And then, like they play the first song and then it's like, they cut into fuel and then everything blacks out and then the flame pots go off. And I'm like, that's the most incredible thing I've ever seen.
Yeah. I'm hooked. Yeah.
And I think one of the first times I sat down with Benoit, we were talking about stuff and I said, okay, I have to ask a question. And I explained that scenario and he was like, yeah, that was me. I'm like, man, that was awesome.
Yeah.
But I'd been working on Perry Mason season 1 in LA, and Ben had posted that he was looking for a rigging programmer to go and do Ghostbusters up in Calgary.
Yeah. I remember when he did that. Yeah.
And he's a renowned hog guy, and I'd been an Onyx guy since about 2010. I mean, I cut my teeth back on hog 2s and hog 1Ks back in the day, but I'd started really diving into Onyx in about 2010, and that had become my console of choice.
It's weird that Onyx has even been around that long. Like when did Onyx start? It couldn't have been much before that.
Well, I mean, Onyx was originally M series by Martin.
Yeah, of course.
And and that was a carry on from the Maxis series.
Yeah.
And I'd use the Maxis a bit in Hollywood.
So let me give you a weird bit of history. So I worked at Martin in the 90s and was part of, really getting that company from being a tiny, obscure disco lighting manufacturer to being a professional. I got them on their first tours and that kind of stuff. And so I was at a trade show in Europe and I ran into these weird Belgian dudes at a booth called Case. And what caught my eye was they had this, and we had been in talks with CompuLight. We were in talks with multiple other companies because it was becoming apparent that we were getting screwed by lighting console manufacturers at Martin. It felt like they were making our fixtures look bad. In hindsight, we were making our fixtures look bad, not them. But we thought that we needed to be partnered with a lighting console manufacturer. And CompuLight were difficult. A lot of the other ones were already sort of captured by other manufacturers. And so I see these two Belgian guys, and the thing that caught my eye was they had these moving faders. And I'm looking at this console, and the faders are all moving, and I'm like, whoa, that's cool. And so I just started talking to the one guy, and I can't even remember his name. And Eric Loader is going to be texting me as soon as he listens to this podcast, and he's going to tell me all of their names again because his memory is incredible. But so anyways, I started talking to these guys, and long story short, we ended up not only partnering with them, but then eventually acquired their company as well. And that's what became eventually Max's.
The Case.
So it was my fault.
No, I've never actually operated a Case. I've seen one, never actually operated it. But I mean, like the equivalent of the time back then was like Scan Commander or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. Or the Navigator. The Navigator.
What was there was the little high end panel that they mounted in the wall, and
the LCD controllers.
Those ones.
Benoit was a master of those. Him and Tim Grievous at high end. They were the masters of those.
There was a few of them back in Perth back in the day, and I used a few of those. But I'd originally, like I said, I cut my teeth in Oz on Hog 1Ks, whole Hog 2s, the Echelons, Jan's event series, a whole bunch of stuff. I was on the rigging crew on a movie in Hawaii, and up until that point, like working in Port, this is before I moved to LA. It's 2010ish. In LA, someone would be like, "Oh, here's an Avo roller cue. Use that for your show." Or, "Hey, the rigging gaffer owns a whole, like a hog. Use that." Okay, so I just use whatever console was thrown my way, which was good because you had to stay on top of things and you had to learn different things.
Yeah, it's wild.
I kind of missed the Grand MA train. No one ever brought one of those in, so I never really got to play with one of those. Like the rental company that I worked for in Perth, when I left in 2003, a week before I left, they got a Grand MA1 full size, and I'm just like, really? It happens now? Thanks, fellas. So I was doing this movie in Hawaii in 2010, and Jeff comes up and he's like, "Hey man, what kind of console are you on?" I went, why? And he's like, "Oh, we're doing a whole bunch of stage stuff on this thing in North Carolina. When we finish in Hawaii, I want you to come and program. Can if you've got a console you can bring?" I went, "Yep, I can make that happen." So basically I I did a bunch of research, and I called a friend of mine, Joe McGinley, who I'd worked with at Hollywood Lights in Portland, and said, "Dude, I've got to buy a console. I'm thinking about this." He's like, "Dude, you got to call Matthias at Martin. He's got this new thing called the M1 coming out. You're going to have to check it out." I went, "Okay." So I called Matthias. I'm like, "Hey man, Joe told me to call you and talk to you about this thing. I need something that'll do this, 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 and this." He's like, "Oh yeah, this will do that." I said, "Okay, I'm in Hawaii. Can you get me a demo? We've got one in Seattle. Can you get it to me in Hawaii?" "No." "Okay, I need it the first week. I need it the week before Christmas. We can air freight you one from Denmark. Cool. Here's the check. Thanks. Never seen it. Never touched it." I'd seen some photos of it, and I read the specs and went, "Yeah, that's cool." So I bought it. And we took it to North Carolina. My first show on it was on a $200 million Hollywood feature. And it was so new there wasn't a manual. I'd be standing at the desk going, "Yep, cool, you need this to happen? Matthias, tell me how to make this happen now. Now, I need to know now." "Okay, cool, thanks." And so, that started my relationship with Matthias and with Martin.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that's how I sort of got into Onyx. It was friends.
Yeah.
And, I was, like I said, I was living in Portland. Portland was a Martin town. There was one guy that had an MA and another guy that had a Hog and another guy that, the theaters had ETC consoles, but for live event stuff, it was all Martin. Yeah. And I felt comfortable in it instantly.
I actually have a funny story about Martin in Portland too. Yeah. So when I first started at Martin in 1991, I'm Canadian. I don't know shit about the United States. And suddenly I'm the West Coast regional sales manager for Martin. And so I've been to California to the NAMM show a whole bunch of times because I used to own a music store and I always went to NAMM. But outside, and I've been to Vegas. But outside of that, I haven't been anywhere in the West Coast, really. At Seattle, when I was a musician and stuff. But so I'm just ringing up all of these different dealers that were on our books. And so I called Rich Fuller, who at the time owned Hollywood Lights. And I said, hi, I'm Martin. I'm Marcel with Martin, and I'm coming to Portland, and I'd like to come in and see you. And he goes, fuck off. Click. And I call him back, and I'm like, Rich? And he's like, yeah, didn't I tell you to fuck off? And I said, yeah, but what's going on here? Like, I'm coming up there. I just want to come in and meet you. And he says, have you not, do you guys not keep notes on accounts or anything? And I said, why? What happened? And he said, well, you sold me fog machines that caught fire. And nobody ever solved the problem. And I don't ever want to see another piece of Martin equipment. And so please don't ever call me again. So I fly up to Portland like the next week or whatever, and go knock on Rich Fuller's door, and he goes, "What the hell are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I told you I was going to come in and see you," and he said, "I told you not to," and I said, "It doesn't matter, you seem like a nice enough guy, and I want to fix the problem. Tell me what the problem is and how can I fix it." Yeah. So I worked my ass off, and next thing you know, I sold them, 24 of, at the time, our biggest lights and tons of other stuff. And they became a huge customer for Martin over the years. But just because I refused to go down in literal flames, because of a burning fog machine.
Absolutely.
But anyways, my stories aside, gone.
No, of course. So that's kind of how I ended up on the M series, which eventually became Onyx. And like I said, I've known Matthias for going to be going on 15 years.
Dude. Yeah, he's a great guy.
Super fun. Yep. I always like catching up with him. So I was in LA. I was doing season 1 of Perry Mason, and there's a Facebook forum which is all Hollywood programmers. And Ben had posted saying he was going up to Calgary to do Ghostbusters, and he needed a rigging program, and I was like, oh, that'd be cool, because I kind of wanted to dip my toes back into the hog world again, because it's very, very widely used in Hollywood. And I said, if you're going to learn hog from anyone, Ben's the guy to learn it from. And so him and I were
interesting. I think Ben was on the podcast. No, he was on the podcast, but he was telling me, I just seem to recall him doing this thing, this Ghostbusters, when and he was on the podcast, and it was secret, but we didn't start the podcast until 2019. So this was way before that. I don't remember. Something about him going to Calgary, because he said, I got to go to Calgary for something, and I can't talk about it. Maybe there was another Ghostbusters filmed in Calgary or something?
It's just the one. It was just the one. Remember. I mean, it was a few years ago. 2019 sounds about right.
On me right now.
We were in discussions. It was 2019, because we were in discussions. We were talking about me going and doing that with him. And then I got a phone call about going to do Marvel's WandaVision. And if you're a film lighting programmer, like Marvel's like the peak of the mountain. That's what you want to be.
No kidding. Yeah.
And so I was asked to come and do, because that's when they were starting to really get into streaming television. And I got a phone call. Hey man, can you come to Atlanta and do WandaVision? I was like, yep.
Wow.
So off I went. And it was one of those things. It was a really cool experience. Go to Atlanta for 5 months, work at Trilith, work on this big Marvel production. And it was a really, really cool thing. And it was one of those moments where, you're like, oh, my career's doing this. I'm finally getting to this point that I want to be at. And then COVID happened.
Yeah, brutal.
And it was interesting. We finished filming in Atlanta in I think it was the last week of February, and we were supposed to take 3 weeks off, and then we were going to go back to LA and film a few more weeks in LA.
You were taking 3 weeks off to slow the curve.
But no. Well, there wasn't a curve at that stage. I hadn't even started at that stage.
Yeah.
So I fly back.
We just didn't know.
Right.
Yeah.
I fly back to Portland. Fly back to LA. Get my car. I'd just gotten a new apartment because I knew I was going to be in LA for a couple of months. Went back to my house in Portland and then sat there for the next 3.5 months waiting for things to come back up again. And then, what it was supposed to have been, 3 weeks of shooting at the end of WandaVision ended up being, I think, 6 or 8 weeks because they decided to rewrite a whole bunch of the story and recast one of the kids. There was a whole bunch of stuff. So it turned into this big, we were one of the first shows to come back out of the gate post-COVID. And, it was sort of a bit of a lifeline after that big break because my gear had been shipping back from Atlanta and landed at the rental house in Los Angeles. And basically the week it landed, everything got shut down. So all of my gear was locked up in the rental house. I hadn't touched a lighting console in, 4 months. And then I'm back on the movie set. I'm like, what is this? How does this go again? Okay. And then you're back into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, did that. And then,
so you were only off for a few months because of COVID?
It was about 4 months. Yeah. 4.5 months.
Yeah. I know television and movies and stuff were a lot quicker to come back than obviously live events.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, 3 or 4 months, that's like a nice break.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily, life-changing like it was for so many people in our industry or companies in our industry. I remember talking with Ben a bunch of times during that as well and what he was going through and those kinds of things. So.
Well, and one of the things that happened during a lot of that period is a lot of people got together and they were doing podcasts and talking to each other and doing things. And this is kind of what ties into the Ben thing again in a minute. I'd been doing some stuff for Obsidian and I did some training stuff for them during COVID and worked on a few shows. And then I was still really heavily into the sort of M series Onyx stuff because I was, Hell's Kitchen is all done on Onyx. Love is Blind is done on Onyx. There's a whole bunch of that sort of reality TV stuff that if, Ed Motz and a few guys do, it's all Onyx based. So it's kind of, I float in with those guys every now and again. And I was sort of trying to get into like I said, dipping my toes in the hog thing. And I was sort of had some questions about some networking stuff. So I called my friend, Elton James, who's a big 728 hog programmer. He's done like, both Suicide Squad movies. He's working on a new Superman movie. Like he's in the top 5 somewhere. Yeah. I don't know which one, but he's in the top 5. And I called him up and I had to ask him this question about something and it turned into this 3-hour discussion about, our programming philosophy and how we work and how we like to work and the things, and just talking about things. And I said, I felt like, WandaVision had done some really good stuff for my career because he's like, I really like what you did on WandaVision. That was really cool. And like to hear that from him was like this guy's one of the guys and he's complimenting me. And I said, I think it did pretty well for my stock. He's like, dude, if you're a hog guy, you'd be in the top 10 already.
Yeah, really? Wow.
Okay, time to think. Yeah. So literally the next day I called a mate of mine. I'm like, have you got a spare Roadhog? And he went, yep. I said, can I borrow it? He went, yep. So I went over and I picked it up. And, I was key programming on a fairly big TV show working 70 hours a week. I would go to work for my 10, 12, 14 hour day, whatever it was. I would come home and basically I sat down at the Roadhog for a couple of hours a night and started pressing buttons, going through and making notes, making cheat sheets, doing all this sort of stuff. And I was like, okay, so this is basically the same. I kind of remember most of this. The carryovers are very similar. There's a lot of similarities. I mean, it's like all consoles basically do the same thing. It's just the keystrokes and,
same shit, different syntax.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I just have to remember when I'm on a hog, I have to speak Yoda as opposed to like, Onyx speaks regular English.
Yeah.
As soon as I speak Yoda, I'm fine.
That's funny.
So I was doing all that, and Elton calls me up one day, and he's like, "How you going, man?" I'm like, "Yeah, good." He's like, "How you going with the hog thing?" I said, "Oh, dude, it's going really good. Like, I worked out how to do this and this and this and this." He said, "Do you reckon you could do a show with it?" I said, "Well, give it a go." And he's like, "Oh, I've got a friend that's looking for a program." I said, "Oh, yeah. What's the gig?" He said, "Oh, it's second unit on Black Panther 2.
Damn.
I went, "Oh." I said, "Oh, who's the gaffer?" He's like, "Oh, it's the guy that did Avatar." Right.
So who's that?
His name's Dan Riffle.
Okay.
Yeah, he did the second Avatar movie, and I think he just that thing that just came out about Saturday Night Live. He did that as well. He's done some big stuff.
Yeah.
Big stuff. And I said, "What? You think this is a little much for me at this stage?" He said, "Do you reckon you can do it?" I said, "I reckon I can give it a go. And if they don't fire me in the first week, I should be fine." He said, "All right, cool. I'll give you your number then." So, he gave Dan my number. Dan called me up. We had a conversation. I said, "Listen, man, I know how to do the job." And I always have this conversation when a gaffer calls me up. I'm like, "Okay, this is who I am. This is kind of how I work. I'm going to bring this, this, and this. I would hope that you would bring this, this, and this. And if they say yes, I usually take the job."
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we had a really cool conversation. And then the thing that sealed the deal was he said, "Oh, Scott Barnes is the lead programmer. And Scotty's the guy."
Yeah.
Scotty is the guy in Hollywood. So I was like, "So I'm going to be on stage 1 and Scotty's going to be working over on stage 2. He went, "Yep. If I've got any problems, I'll just walk next door and ask Scotty." It seemed like the perfect thing. So I go and I do that. And my philosophy was, if I don't get fired in the first week, I can do this.
Yeah.
Because, I'd done shows similar to that level. It wasn't anything totally different from what I'd done before.
Yeah, but now you're on a new console.
Yeah, but like I said, I literally spent, it was like cramming for an exam.
Yeah,
and I literally had a notebook where I'd written down.
You haven't been on a movie set, and you know, under fire, as it were.
Yeah, I'm used to
your idol next to you. You know,
right?
Yeah.
So. It was tough. But it was all again. Like I've had been very lucky, I think, in my career that I met the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
And Dan was great, and he really knows what he wants. He knows how to ask for it. He knows how to communicate with a programmer, which not a lot of gaffers necessarily do. The really, really good ones do. Dan's probably one of the best. And it was funny because, we did the first couple of days and I was kind of like, "Yep, cool, coming. Yep, here it is. Got it. Okay, next. We get through everything." And I go up to him at the end of the second day and I was like, "Hey man, I just want to check in and see how you're feeling about everything. I think the communication's good. How are you feeling about the workflow?" He's like, "Yeah, no," he said, "I think it's really good." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool, man, because I haven't really programmed on a hog in like a decade." And his face just dropped and he went, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I thought I told you that." And he's like, "Oh, well, you're doing really good. Just keep it up." I went, "Cool."
That's awesome.
So I went and did that. And at the time I'd been doing a TV show called The Offer. And I'd had to leave The Offer to go and do Black Panther. But it was one of those things, I was never really one to, like, if I start a show, I want to finish a show. But when you get a phone call to do something like Black Panther, you go and do it.
Yeah,
so I did that. And then I came back and I finished The Offer. And during the course of that, like I said, while I was studying the hog thing, a lot of the guys had done a series of videos during COVID. And one of the videos, it was Scott Barnes, Elton James, Benoit, Dave Slodky, Josh Satcher. They were all sitting there talking about hog and how they use it and their process and all this sort of stuff. And I watched it, and there was a thing that Benoit said. I'm like, I think he means this, but I'm not 100%. Oh, okay. So I just got onto Facebook and I was like, "Hi, Ben, it's Chalky. I was watching this video and you said this. I just wanted to clarify what you meant." So he messaged me back and it started this dialogue. And he's like, "Oh, what are you doing right now?" I said, "Oh, I'm doing Black Panther 2 in Atlanta. I'm doing
this little movie."
Yeah. Well, we did one section of second unit, and then I went back to The Offer, and then that finished, and then they called me back for the second part, which was like,
wild.
I did a good job.
I guess I won.
Yeah, and so I was on that, and I was talking to Ben. I'm like, well, I'm doing this thing in Atlanta. He's like, oh, what are you doing after that? I said, oh, I don't really have anything lined up after that. And he's like, oh, I said, I got this little movie I need a programmer for. Can you come and, do you want to come and help? And I was like, oh, yeah, cool. It was this little movie called 80 for Brady, and it was like, you know, Sally Field and Jane Fonda. It was a fun little thing to work on. It wasn't big, but it was a chance to work with Benoit. And, you know, if you're going to learn Hog, you learn from a master. So I thought, oh, this would be really good. And, you know, I knew who he was, and I'd always been interested to meet him and work with him. And so I walked in on the first day, and he was super cool. We got along. You know, he's Canadian, so I don't have to explain the jokes. Yeah. It's just helpful. And so we sat down the first day, and I said, okay. I said, you know, I'm going to be setting up your console for you. What do you want? He's like, oh, I want this, this, and this. And I went, okay. So I went through and I did all that, and I was like, well, you know, in my experience, you've got this, but I would also want these things. So I built him that as well. He walks in the next day. I'm like, okay, so I did that, and then I did this, and what?
That like, could have gone either way, right? Like that could have been bad, or that could have been good. Yeah.
But he's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so we just kind of hit the ground running, and we found, you know, just a very similar philosophy in the way we work, and both relaxed and just cool. And so I worked with him on that for about 3 weeks. I think the show went for 6 or 8 weeks, but about 3 weeks into that, he's like, what are you doing after this? I said, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm going to see what's going on. He said, well, I haven't locked it in yet, but I may have a job you might be interested in. I said, oh yeah, what's that? He says, well, happens in a galaxy far, far away.
Oh, wow.
Oh, do tell. And he asked me to be his rigging programmer on Skeleton Crew.
Yeah.
Which has just come out on Disney Plus recently.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things, I ummed and ahed about it, because at the time I was living up in Valencia, you know, Valencia, Santa Clarita, and Star Wars was shooting down in Manhattan Beach. And that would have meant, you know, 2.5 hours of driving every day.
Yeah.
And again, it was one of those things, like I wasn't concerned about having the chops to do the job or anything, but I was a bit, and I called Elton and I was like, hey man, I just got to run this by you. You know, Benoit's just asked me to do Star Wars with him. And he's like, why are you calling me? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, dude, it's Benoit and it's Star Wars. Just say yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's
thanks,
got a
man.
point.
See ya.
He's got a point.
He absolutely did. And what was cool about it is, I've worked, you know, like I said, I've worked in the film industry since 2006. And film's very different to, you know, theater or rock and roll or whatever. You know, you have the first unit crew that's on set making the movie, and you have the rigging crew that prepares everything. You know, like in concert lighting, the touring crew comes in, they set everything up, and then they run it. Yeah. Whereas in film, you have a rig crew and you have a shooting crew, and you know, how those two departments interact is critical to the way things work and how efficiently they work.
Yeah.
Now, you know, like I said, until the advent of LEDs, you know, in mid-2010s, it was all tungsten lights and, you know, CD80 dimmer packs or sensor racks, and it was just lots of cable and lots of power and all this sort of stuff. The technology's really changed.
Yeah.
You know, it used to be if you had 2 universes on a show, that was a lot. You know, one of our 7 stages on Skeleton Crew had 128 universes.
Jesus. Wow.
Yeah. So
lights are more reliable now too. Like there's not as much repair being done because the heat isn't as expensive as it used to be with all the discharge lamps and tungsten lamps and stuff. Right.
But now you've got all these multi-parameter fixtures, like, you know, like sky panels, 20 channels, the Vortex is 20 channels. You know, you can get a like a Sky Panel S360 to 196 channels per fixture.
Yeah.
So how we now go about data infrastructure and networking is hugely different. And so, you know, I hadn't actually really used any ArtNet until 2015, 2016. It wasn't something that I did. You didn't need it.
Yeah. DMX was
fine. And then
fine.
It became a thing, and then that was the thing that I became super interested in. So, you know, Ben calls me and he's like, hey, do you want to come and do Skeleton Crew? I said, okay, here's how I'd like to approach this. Instead of us working for the rigging crew as DMX techs. Why don't we do lighting control as our own department? And he's like, what do you mean? I said, look, you draw the plots that in conjunction with the gaffer and the DP. We work out the numbering. We work out where all the data cablings are run. Basically, we deliver lights to the crew that are set up, ready to rig. They rig them, plug in the power. We give them access to the data stuff. We do the networking. We do the DMX work. We do all that stuff. They just have to worry about making sure that there's power there and that the lights are on. We're going to make sure that they work. That was the basic overview.
Yeah.
Like, let the data nerds do data nerd shit. Let the rigging crew do electrical stuff. And they went,
Why is it all carved up like that, though, anyways? Is it due to different unions or?
No, I mean, we're all in the same union, but the reality is laying out 4-rot and setting up managed network switches are two very, very disparate skill sets. And some guys just aren't interested in learning that.
Yeah. It just seems like in the live event space, it's all done by the same crews, whereas it's very specialized and very compartmentalized in TV and movies.
I think that's just the nature of the way a film set works. It was the most confusing thing to me when I got onto a film set and, haze machines were done by special effects. I'm like, isn't it a lighting job? Because there's a lighting guy and concept film lighting. I always did smoke machines.
But,
it's the way it's partitioned up, hair department's one thing, makeup department's another thing, costume department's another thing. Why does it not make, and that's all stuff that's on an actor.
Yeah.
Why does it not make sense that, lighting control would be one thing, mains power would be another thing?
Yeah.
I think it's just got to the point where some of this stuff is so specialized.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I'm kind of curious about is that relationship between because I really don't know jack shit about television or movie film lighting. I've supplied a lot of it over the years, but I don't know anything about it. But when we're looking for that relationship between you and who's the person that you answer to as the programmer? Is that
as the key programmer, you answer to the chief lighting technician or the gaffer.
Yeah, the gaffer. Is the gaffer lighting programmer relationship similar to the LD lighting programmer relationship in a concert tour or a concert?
Yeah. So basically,
the LD would stand there and say, "What I'm thinking is maybe a red look around the blah blah blah, and focus on her dress."
It's
or
more,
whatever.
It's sort of broken down again because effectively on a film set, the director of photography is the lighting designer.
Mm-hmm.
He's the guy that says, okay, we're going to put the camera here. There's going to be a backlight on Chalky. That back wall's too bright. Dim that down. The light in the alcove there, take that down 20%. And depending on the relationship between the director of photography, the gaffer, and the programmer, either the DP is going to filter everything through the gaffer, who then gives the commands to me, or is how I like to do it. I like to be, because the DP will have a big cart with big screens so we can see what all the cameras are doing. I actually really like to park myself right next to the DP. So it's literally me, the gaffer, and the DP, and I'm just standing there and I'm just listening to their conversation and I'm just doing things.
Yeah.
And then they look at me and they're like, "Oh, you did it all." I went, "Yep."
Yeah.
And if you have a really good relationship with your gaffer while your gaffer's out on set, moving something around, the DP will turn to you and say, "Hey man, can you do this?" And I'm like, "Hey boss, the boss just asked me to do this. Go ahead."
Yeah.
And then it becomes a collaborative
dynamic. So the LD or the DP is kind of split, or that LD role is split between the DP and the gaffer, basically.
Yeah.
The DP is sort of the director of it all, and the gaffer is the doer. He makes it happen.
Yeah, exactly. And again, there are some gaffers that are very technically, very clever technically, and now they can just sit there and say, like Dan Riffle will say, "Oh, can you take that high beam and pan it left 15 degrees and then narrow the beam by 10%," and he just spot on every time. Whereas you'll have other guys that be like, "Yeah, just pan it. No, it's too big. Make it smaller." And sometimes they really know the language, sometimes they don't, and it just depends on the person.
Yeah,
I an important part of my job because, you know, I'm the interface between the lights and the creatives, which is the DP and the gaffer. Yeah. So it's my job I actually think as good as I am at punching the buttons, I actually think that my communication skills is the most important part.
And are you ever asked to offer feedback? Like, does he ever say, what do you think of this look? Sure. Would you change this or that or whatever?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah. Depends on the gaffer. They're like, oh, what do you know? Or they'll be like, oh, just give us a color. And you're like, oh, okay. What do you think of that? Yeah, it's close. Have a bit more red look. Yeah, that's good. Okay, cool. Lock it in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Or you have someone like, you know, Jess Hall, who was the DP on WandaVision, sends you a spreadsheet. It's like, here's my 24 custom colors. Punch them into the console, and we also need to sit down. These were created on this light. We then need to spectra analyze these and create matching colors for these other 4 lights.
Fun,
you know. But brilliance in the fact that you've got 5 different types of light, and you can just pull them out, and they're all going to look exactly the same.
It's funny because I remember when Benoit was making that shift, the transition from rock and roll to television and movies and stuff, and it was scary. You know, at the time it was like, hey, you know, I really think this could work. I'm trying to get closer to home. I think it was when his first kid was born or something.
Yeah.
And he just really wanted to spend more time at home. And so it was for the best, most organic reasons. And it obviously worked out, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's done some amazing stuff, like, you know, Captain Marvel, Bullet Train,
just tons of stuff.
Crew. Like, he's done some big things.
Didn't he do he did the previous Star Wars one? What was that one called?
Obi-Wan.
Mandalorian or something? Didn't he do that one?
No, he did Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Oh, Obi-Wan, right? Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
That was.
I don't watch any of those. I was a Star Wars fan, but then it just got too complicated for me, and I gave up. I gave up. I go for simpler movies.
A lot. But, you know, like, and it was funny when he asked me to do it. I was like, okay, and we sort of worked out a plan, and luckily everyone was pretty on board with trying it this way.
Yeah.
You know, we had a younger rigging gaffer that was interested in trying a different, and I think may have been, you know, like, this will take some of this pressure off me. These guys know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we ended up running 7, or I think at most we had 8 stages running at one. No, we had 7 stages running at one stage.
Yeah.
We had a server on each stage. They were all networked. We were jumping between buildings using VLANs. You know,
so you've kind of become an expert in that world, right? In the data and like, I mean, you certainly, I've checked out your socials and stuff. And by the way, congrats. I mean, your content, your content creation and delivery, like even just the unbox stuff that you're doing. I love that kind of stuff. And you're doing a really, really good job on content creation. And I don't know I didn't look at what your views are or anything, and I don't really care, honestly. It's either good or it's bad. I don't care how many people look at it. And in our industry, the numbers are always going to be small anyways.
Yeah, they're always going to be small. I mean, it's just the nerds that tune in, and I love you guys. Thanks for joining. Click like and subscribe.
I'm
nerd.
Kidding.
You know, because I mean, that's what I started out as. Like, when I was a young guy getting into lighting, I could tell you everything about every light and what was in it, and how many gobos it had, and how many channels. Like, these days, I just don't. Does it look pretty cool? That works for me. Does it do the job I need to do? Great.
Well, because it's a whole other job staying on top of that stuff, you know, and I used to pride myself, but like, you know, I used to sell, I still do. I own a company that sells a lot of sound systems, but I can't, like, I used to know how to walk up to like an old Soundcraft 24 channel console and be able to control sound for somebody, right? For a band, you know, there could be a 4 or 5 piece band on stage and I could make it sound decent. These digital consoles with Dante and all this stuff and plugins and everything, I have no clue. I couldn't even turn the thing on. No idea.
Let me give you a story that ties in the DP gaffer programmer relationship. Star Wars, and how relationships can affect things. So we were doing Skeleton Crew, and like I said, part of my job as the rigging, so basically my job as the rigging programmer is to set everything up so that Benoit can walk in on the day and just do his shit, right? Like, my job is to make sure that, you know, like the system's up, the network works, all the lights work, he can get the vision that he needs. Basically, it's my job to make sure everything works the minute he walks in the door. That's the job.
Yeah.
Part of that job is sometimes selecting what kind of lights are going to get used. Because he'll be like, hey man, the gaffer wants to do this kind of gag. Can you find a light that'll do it? Because he's under the pump all the time. When they're filming, it's go, 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 go. Especially on a show where you've got, 700 LEDs on a set, and you've got to make certain ones flash and do magic, and there's pixel mapping happening.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like, hey man, we're doing this gag and we need a light that'll do the thing. And one instance of that was I got a phone call. Hey man, can you go and see the DP? And he wants to ask you a question. I said, okay. He said, oh, we're doing this thing, and someone was saying we should use a moving light, but I want to use a projector. And I'm like, okay, what do you want to do? And he says, well, there's this scene and the kids are going through the forest on speeder bikers, and we need to do kind of the dappling thing. And I went, can you open up your laptop, go to YouTube, look up Journey to Mysterious Island Flying Bees. And it brings up this video from a movie called Journey to the Mysterious Island, where the characters are flying through a forest on these giant bees.
Yeah.
And that was the show I did with Jeff in 2010. And again, you've got, you're on a green screen stage and you've got these people on this green thing, which in CG, they're going to turn into bees. How do you get the dapplage of the forest? Give me 8 vipers and let me put in the animation wheel. You get that breakup. And so I show him that video in 2023 or whenever it was, 2022. It's like, yeah, that's cool. That's what we want to do. Okay, I call the rigging gaffer. Can you get me 2 Maximus? Thanks. And I said, so how do you want to do this? He said, well, we're going to put a projector on a camera crane and then we can lift it up and down and move it around and make it do all that stuff. I said, well, that thing I just showed you, we just did that with moving lights. He said, well, let's try the moving light then. Okay. So, day of the test, we come in, they've got this big projector, they've got it pointed at a wall. I'm like, okay, what are you going to play on that? He's like, I'm going to play, he plays me something. I said, how bright is it? He says, oh, it's as bright as it gets. Okay, so I grab one of the Maximuses, I crank it up, and I put in an animation wheel with I think I put a prism in it or something as well, just to give it some movement, right? And then I start dialing it up on the intensity, and I'm like, okay. And I'm like, is that as bright as that projector gets? And he went, yeah, that's at 100%. He's like, what's the light at? And I went, 12.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
And he went, really? Yeah. 12? And I went, yeah. And then I just cranked it up to full. I said, how many of these do you want me to get? And he said, yeah, give me 10 of them.
That's hilarious.
So, and again, this comes down to part of my job, which is to take, I think this is what I like about film is it's not, there are days I miss you just get to do that cool eye candy through the smoke shit that you do in rock and roll, there are days that I miss that. But at the pinnacle of film, you're having to sort of interpret creative visions from multiple different angles and then create something that reflects that. And sometimes it's like, get me this light or use this color or get this angle or let's get that gobo and that prism.
Let me jump into a controversial topic though. Yeah. So isn't AI going to get rid of most of that stuff at some point? Won't AI be able to look at that forest thing and make it look exactly like you want it, flying bees and all? And aren't we pretty damn close to that right now?
Here's maybe. I don't know. I know that the first time, because I'd watched The Mandalorian, I'd watched some of the Star Wars stuff.
Yeah.
And the first time that I walked onto the volume stage, there wasn't anything on it. There wasn't a set. It was just this black box. And I went, oh, yeah, cool, whatever. What's cool about that?
Yeah.
And then a couple of days later, I walked on and there was a set built on it. And there was background content. And there's people walking around and I went, holy shit, this is a Star Wars show. This is cool,
Yeah, yeah.
But I do know that if you watch it enough, and if you know what you're looking for, you go, oh, that's the volume. Oh, that's the volume. Oh, that's the volume. It's like, the early days of CGI, you could really tell it was CGI. I recently had that throwback thing. Like I went and watched, I think it was like The Last Starfighter, which was one of the first movies that ever used digital animation as a thing. And like, it's still really cool. Be like, man, I don't know if that's aged well. like it looks great because it looks really cheesy.
Yeah.
It doesn't look great because it looks great.
Well, go back and watch the original Star Wars. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, no, but here's the difference. Like the very first, like Episode 4, the first Star Wars movie, that first, and I remember seeing it at the drive-in in '77. I was 3, but I remember this. That first scene where like the big starship comes on,
you're
like, holy shit.
Yeah.
It looks real. And the reason that it looks real is it was a model that someone shined a light on.
Yeah.
It was actually a real object in space. And even particularly something like Blade Runner, right? Blade Runner, to me, one of the most visually stunning movies ever made.
Yeah.
All of the miniatures of that, real models, real lighting, real smoke, like you can't CGI. I don't know.
CGI and AI are so different, though. Like CGI, I agree with you. I don't like a lot of the Netflix big budget movies bore the hell out of me. Like I just watched the Jamie Foxx and Cameron Diaz one. It was pretty good, but I mean, usually they're so boring. The big effects and the big, it just looks so stupid.
Right.
But if you have you checked out Sora at all, the AI app? Check out Sora, or even just search YouTube for some Sora videos. I mean, it is amazing what they're pulling off already with AI. And so I don't know. I don't know how long. I don't know when. I know that I believe that also, obviously, Hollywood is losing their minds over it right now because who owns the content? How does that all work?
Right.
What's it all? It's such a scary
and I think
area
that's
to enter.
I think that's a big part of the restructuring that's happening now.
It is,
Ben and I did Skeleton Crew together, and then we went and did. After that, we went straight into another show called The Residents, which is for Netflix and Shondaland. There's some really funny concept. The idea is there's a state dinner at the White House, and someone kills the head usher of the White House staff, and they bring in this kooky kind of like investigator to work out who did it. The ironic thing for me is the fact that the state dinner was being held for the Prime Minister of Australia, and the entertainment for the evening was Kylie Minogue. So I got to meet Kylie, which was pretty
that's
cool.
Hilarious.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Yeah.
But another big show. We got one stage that's got 700 vortexes on it or something. Like it's big. And again, that kind of peak of the career thing, and then we have the writer's strike and the actor's strike, and then come out of that, and now there's just been this sort of implosion in Hollywood. It's part of the reason that I moved back to Australia for a while, but
but a lot of those strikes seem to be around protect me from AI. But you can't. At the end of the day, you can't. You can't protect everyone from AI. It just isn't going to work.
Well, and it's the same thing. Welding. Robots replaced welders in car factories. Robots replaced spray painters in car factories. Robots replaced
surgeons.
People putting
surgeons
in some. Well, and
there's
this
robotic
is
surgery that's cutting edge cancer surgery and stuff. A very good friend of mine had, I think it was prostate cancer surgery done by a robot. That he was one of the really early recipients of this new technology, and it cured him of cancer. It's gone, So
I mean, I think I've always been one for embracing, technology. AI
is a tough one, though. It's scary. Because it's probably the most impactful. This is the most impactful new technology, I think. Given everything that this planet and our human race has gone through, I think this is probably the most impactful change that we're about to be hit with. Is AI?
And here's my take on it: whether it's robotics or automation or any form of technology, at the end of the day, it's just a tool, and how we implement it, what we learn about it, how we use it affects how it affects us. The guys that were you remember the giant old 96 channel lighting consoles that were all faders.
Yeah.
I'm sure when the first whole hog came out, the guys that had spent their lives using those were like, "Oh, that thing will never catch on."
Yeah, that's bullshit. I ain't using that little thing. Yeah.
Right.
Guess
now
what?
I can literally run,
Yeah.
now I can literally run 250 universes from my laptop. I mean, it's
exactly
mind blowing.
Yeah.
But again, and it comes back to the, console, just a computer with a lot of buttons on it. How you use it determines, how you are about it. And I think AI is the same thing. I think there are some creative forms or creative art forms that AI is never going to replace. There are some that it will. How's that going to affect film in the long run? I think that's above my pay grade.
Yeah, to me, like the future, basically, if Netflix can produce content for 1/10 of the cost by doing it through AI versus, on location, multiple locations, multiple thousands of people, whatever it is, paying actors $10 million and all that stuff. Instead, they can just create actors and etc. So, yeah, I mean, we could go down a rabbit hole on it, and neither one of us can spend all day on that topic. But AI is something I follow very closely, and I, certainly the arts in general and creative in general is one of the areas that most concerns me. Music. I've just created a podcast and that was entirely AI, and within it, the theme music I did on AI, the logo I did on AI, the entire podcast is AI. And in creating the music, I'm a musician. And, the app is called Suno.ai. Check it out someday when you've got time to waste. It's going to blow your mind. You can literally grab your iPhone and hum into it and go, and say, create a song around that's about lighting consoles. Within about 3 minutes, you're going to have an unbelievable song using that melody in whatever genre you say. You could say, now make it reggae, now make it death metal, now make it jazz, make it a British woman singer instead of, whatever. It's so insane. And
what I do know at the moment is that part of the debate around the writer's strike was the fact that, they didn't want AI taking the work of script writers, right?
Yeah.
And one of the questions that no one's quite answered yet is, if something's created by AI, who owns it? And that's one of the great debates as far as...
Of course it is. Yeah, of course
screenwriting and whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oops. Hate it when that happens. The other one still works.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Let me just... So that was a big part of that debate. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm not full bottle on AI, and I probably should get my head into the game. But
so I want to get into some other stuff. You created a business around specifically around Onyx control systems, I believe. Or I think at least that's the primary component of that business, anyways.
Yeah. Like I said, I started out in 2010. I bought an M1, and so one of the things that's unique about the film industry is if it and this may well eventually change. If you're a lighting programmer and you own a console, you get to rent it to production. So I ended up with a lighting console, and then I found that I needed another one. So I needed a backup. So I bought another one, and then, hang on, I need these things called nodes. So I bought a couple of nodes. Yeah. And my business partner and I created this company, Chalky Control, and we had some stuff and we would rent it to production. And then I found out I'm on another show, so I need another console and I need a couple more nodes. And so one day, again, my tie-in with Matthias, he's like, hey, we've got this new thing coming out. I want you to check it out. And he sent me one of the first Netron EN4s, the little 4-port node. He says, have a look at this. Tell me if it's any good. And, I'd used Swisson, I'd used DMX King, I'd used a few of the other ones that I'd seen around on sets. And I'm like, yeah, this thing's pretty cool. It looks solid, and, I like what it does, and it's got some cool features in it. And, so he sent me one, and then I bought another 6. So I had 6 nodes, and then I'm like, I need an opti splitter to go with those. And so I started buying bits and pieces. And then I was like, wow, this stuff's really cool. And like I said, my relationship with Matthias, I was like, do you mind if I make some videos with these things? Because people keep asking me how to use them. So my partner, Seda Deborah, and I, we started making little content things about, oh, this is how you work this thing, and this is what this does, and we just started
I watched
making
some of those videos. Like I learned, one of the, I don't remember what the item was even called, but I think it was one of the nodes, and you could switch the input and output panels from the back to the front and the sides and all that stuff. Like very, very good videos. Again, I definitely compliment you on your content creative, and again, it's not that common. Like, I don't know. Do you know a guy named Christian Jackson?
Yeah, I know Christian. I know of him. I don't know him personally.
So Christian's one of the probably the most prolific YouTuber in the lighting industry. He does a lot of how-to videos, a lot of just different types of videos, and he's got tens of thousands of followers that more than what I think anyone else has in our industry, because it's such a small industry.
He does a lot. There's a guy called David Henry that does a lot. He does a lot of mixed content as well. But it just kind of started out as like I would find things that I found interesting. And again, like going back to that guy showing me that thing on that whole Hog 2, people would call me and ask me questions, be like, how do you do this? And I'm like, I'll just make you a video. And so it started that. And then, it turned into this other thing. People would call me up and be like, hey man, where are you getting your nodes from? I'm like, I just, call these guys. They'll get them for you. They'll do you a good price. Yeah. And then, Seda and I were talking about it. I was like, oh yeah, such and such has called me. I told him to go and see, such and such back. And she's like, hang on, what?
Yeah.
Why don't we sell these things?
Why are we making a couple bucks on that? Yeah.
Right. So we got together and we called the guys at Obsidian and we're like, hey, we're referring a lot of people. Could we become a dealer? Yeah. And they were like, well, you've got to have a storefront and you've got to carry this much stock and, all these things. And I was like, hang on, you guys don't really understand the film industry. The guys that I work with, they work 70 hours a week. They don't want to go to a storefront. They don't want to do this. But what they want to do is they want me to bring them and show them something or send them a video and they're going to be like, I want 10. Yeah. Or I want 20. Yeah. And so they were like, okay, well, why don't we give this a go? And we're like, great. And, the next thing we're selling Netron and, Obsidian and Netron equipment, to people in LA and people in Atlanta and people in New Mexico and people in Portland.
For you, man.
Like we're selling all over America. Yeah.
Well, and meanwhile, you've probably been single-handedly responsible for introducing that product into television and film lighting, and making it maybe the number 2 to Hog in that market.
Potentially. Console-wise, not so much. I mean, the big players in Hollywood are Hog, Grand MA, ETC.
So MA has cracked that market as well, huh?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's definitely been, there was a lot of ETC back in the day because your multicam sitcoms were all, very theatrical style. They would come in, they would rehearse. 3-cam sitcoms are done like a theater show. So that was all ETC. Yeah. Scotty really revolutionized the game when he started using, hogs on big features. And then, so a lot of guys picked that up. The young guys that are coming up now are like, oh, I've got to have a Grand MA because it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah, cool. It does everything in the world. I can, the reason that I stuck with Onyx is because I just felt super comfortable and it was the console that I was the best on. I honestly think, with Dialos, they've got the best pixel mapping engine in the business, bar none. Yeah.
Plus, isn't there a cost factor? Like, I know movies have these massive budgets and stuff, but still, like, when you can get a console, and I don't know the price of an Obsidian console these days, but when you can get a console for, call it 15, 20 grand versus 80, like it seems to make a lot of sense, Yeah,
that was always the thing. I like I said, I own 5 Onyx consoles and a Roadhog. There's a reason for that. I've never bought a Grand MA because I would rather be paying a mortgage than paying a console payment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Most of what we do in Hollywood is change intensity and color temperature. Yeah, that's 80% of the work. You've got some whiz bang stuff to do in there, but if you've got a good pixel mapping engine or a media server, you could do it with just about any console.
Yeah, yeah.
There are certain...
and your relationship, obviously, between Maxis and now Obsidian, and with Matthias and the gang over there at Elation / Obsidian. Obviously, this is still a relationship industry. So you do business with the companies that you feel comfortable, and you feel like, if you're on a Marvel film set and you have a problem, that there's somebody that you can reach out to that'll solve your problem.
It's for me, like if I'm doing a small, not a small TV. I mean, like something like Hell's Kitchen isn't exactly a small TV show, but there are things that I would only use Onyx for, and there are certain things where I'd be like, well, I probably need, the networking capabilities that Hog has for that other show, because, Onyx doesn't do that as well. And, a lot of it is about, I'm going to need someone to cover me who's available. And if there's 12 Onyx guys and 30 Hog guys, it just depends.
Yeah, it doubles your availability of people.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I've always been about what's the best tool for the job.
Yeah.
But also what fits within my budget and has the best ROI.
Yeah.
That was the same thing with me with, me getting into Netron wasn't just about, it's a product that a guy that I know and respects makes. It's more for less. Why would I buy a Swisson that's only got 8 ports when I can buy a Netron EN12 that's got 12 ports? And it's about $400 less. Plus, it's got a whole bunch of other features. There's this whole cascade.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And that's kind of what Cine Control became. It started out with a console and a couple of nodes, and now it's I don't know, we got 6 or 7 consoles, and we had at one stage we had something like 48 data racks.
Well, I saw in the video that I watched, I saw some stuff from your warehouse, and I was like, holy shit, he's got a lot of inventory in there. He's got lots of stuff going on,
And it was all about the demands of the productions that were happening. And, I said, on something like Star Wars, you've got, our backbone data network for each of our stages just up in the perms. We would have, 2 big data racks, which is like an EN12 and 2 RDM10s. You've got 32 ports of data stuff coming out of it.
Yeah, it's wild.
And this is before we were even into fully managed networks. Like if I was going to do that show now, it would all be fully managed networks with multiple VLANs just to get around all the information that we need.
Wow.
And it just kind of built up into this thing. And so,
yeah, just to jump topics again, sorry.
Yeah.
So last year you moved back to Australia, but still most of your work is in California, or how does that work?
No. So, the long and short of it is, my mum passed away in 2023. In September 2023, my mum passed away.
Sorry.
Mum and dad had always lived in Perth, although they lived in Brooklyn for about 5 years, which was a really fun time because
strange
they were
change.
in Brooklyn. My mum was, like I said, my mum was a university professor. She was a literacy specialist, and she got hired by the New York Board of Education to be a literacy consultant.
To teach New Yorkers how to speak English?
Yeah, pretty much.
Just kidding.
It's true though. But she lived in Brooklyn for 5 years, so we were all in America for 5 years at the same time, which is cool. But so mum passed away, and my dad wasn't in great health and a bit of dementia going on. So I came back to Australia for about 5.5 months, and I was here, and it was a pretty tumultuous year because it was just after the strike and a few other things, and
brutal.
My marriage my marriage broke down, and
Jesus.
I got back to LA after 5.5 months in Australia, and I was kind of like, you know what, I don't think I like it here anymore. It was just, like I said, your mate may not have liked Australia, or may not have liked Perth, but it is seriously one of the prettiest cities in the world.
Yeah.
And not that you could eat off the sidewalks here, but you just about could.
Yeah.
And I get back to LA and I'm just like, what the fuck?
It's interesting because that's me going from my town in Canada that I'm absolutely in love with, and the people are amazing, and it's clean and it's wonderful, and people are kind, and you can trust people, and you don't even have to lock your car doors and stuff, or your house. And then I come back to Florida,
And, it's a little different than that. And Florida's pretty nice. And, politically, it's pretty easy to deal with in Florida versus, the crazy politics of California. But I get the same feeling. Like every time I come back, I go, why am I back here again? And then it's, 85 degrees while it's minus 20 in Canada. And I remember,
it was 106 here today, I think.
Holy shit. Yeah. It's not that warm here. Not that warm here. Yeah.
It'll be like this for a couple of weeks and then it's back to normal.
So you just didn't want to live in LA anymore, which I can completely understand.
Of things. I knew I'm an only child, so I knew I had to be here to look after my dad, make sure my dad's okay, and he's in full care now. But I still have to be here to sort of manage things. Doing that from California was not a long-term prospect.
Yeah.
I knew I had to do that, and I'd had a couple of opportunities to come back to Australia before. Like I was invited to come back to Perth in 2008 and program on a movie here, and there was a few people who were like, "Oh man, you should stay in Perth. You could do really well here." And I'm just kind of like, "Yeah, I've still got things I need to do in America. Still got things I need to achieve there."
Yeah.
And I came back after this last trip and everything that was going on with my parents. I've kind of like, well, I've done 2 Marvel shows. I've done a Star Wars show. I kind of feel like I've hit that, done those things.
Downhill from here. Yeah.
Well, no, it's not downhill as much. I mean, I could keep doing that, but it would just be more of that. And anything other than that would be kind of a disappointment. And
I like that. Yeah, I like that. That makes sense.
Part of it is, at a certain point, you're just fulfilling your own ego, right? Like every programmer in Hollywood wants to be as good as Scott Barnes.
Yeah.
But there's only ever going to be one Scott Barnes. And until he dies, no one else is going to be him. Yeah. And I was kind of like, you know what? I've worked with him. He's an awesome guy. I love him to death. I don't need to be him. I can just do me.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Becoming him, and then what? You get to the top of a mountain and you go, you know what?
Yeah.
And now I got to walk back down.
And don't get me wrong, like if Benoit called me tomorrow and said, "Hey man, we're doing another episode, doing another series of Skeleton Crew," like I would be on a plane tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'm going for that one.
Yeah,
but living in Los Angeles full time and doing the grind that is Hollywood, because when you're working 70 hours a week and then you've got an hour to 2 hours of commute on either end of that, but come the weekend, man, you're just knackered. It's like I'm going to sleep all this Saturday, Sunday I'm going to do the laundry, and then Monday I'm going to go and do it again.
Yeah.
And it's not like you go on a tour for 3 months and then you get a month off. It's like you work on a show like Skeleton Crew, it's 7 months of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have a week or two off, and then you do that again for another 5 or 6.
I get it.
It's just constant.
Well, and on a personal note, I'm real sorry about your dad and the dementia too, because I have the same thing. So one of the reasons I built a house in Canada is because my mom is still in Calgary, and my sisters are still in Calgary. And my mom's been in a home fortunately, it's moved really slow with her. She's still alive, still healthy. She's 90. She's turning 93 next week. And, she's, I shouldn't say healthy. I mean, she's in a wheelchair now, and she has no idea what planet she's on. One day I'll visit her and I'm her husband, then I'm her brother, then I'm some asshole who's trying to steal her wheelchair. And occasionally she at least believes that I'm her son, But I mean, we're happy to still have her alive, but it's so hard when you're dealing. It's a brutal thing.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's not at that stage yet. He still recognizes who I am, and
that's good.
But he'll call me up. I'll be like, "Hey man, how you doing?" He's like, "Yeah, man, I just got back from Melbourne, and I went and saw a bunch of family and friends." I'm like, yeah, it's cool. That sounds like fun."
Oh, really? Man. Yeah.
Like he's in the log ward in Como. Like he hasn't been anywhere. But
last summer, my mom told me she rode her bike to get there to visit me that day. And, my mom rode a bike when she was a little girl, and she fell off of it, and she's been scared to death of bikes ever since. She don't ride no bikes, but she told me, "Oh, yeah, I ride it all the time. I ride it, to your sister's houses, and I rode it here today, and I always ride my bike." It's amazing the stories they create in their brain. And my mom's really quick. Like, if I ask her, when was the last time you went to Mars? She'll say, "Oh, yeah, yesterday. I had lunch there. We had grilled cheese sandwiches, and it was really good." And she'll make up the whole story. None of it ever happened.
Yeah.
But,
no, of course not. And the secret of that is not arguing and saying that's not the case. It's like, oh man, that was really cool. Wish I'd had one of those sandwiches.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I play games with her, like I'll say, I'll just go with it. But the one thing that I started doing, and at first the home that she's in didn't like it. They sort of said, you're being deceptive. So what my girlfriend and I would stop every time we went to visit my mom, and we'd pick up a cupcake, and we'd bring it in, and we'd sing happy birthday to her. Every time we came to visit her, it was her birthday.
It was her birthday.
And
That's
she
cool.
loved it, and she'd eat the muffin, and everybody would sing and clap and stuff in the place. And they kind of reprimanded me, saying I was being deceptive and it's not good for a dementia patient to trick them and all this stuff. And I said, fuck you. It makes her happy. She smiles, she's happy, and I'm going to do it every time. So if you want me to do it in another room, I'll drag her in another room and sing happy birthday. And then they said, we think it's amazing what you're doing. We love it. And other people are starting to do it now. So why not?
Yeah, no, why not? Yeah, I mean, you want to try and make their lives as happy as possible, and
of course. It's a terrible place to be.
At least once a week I'll go and pick that up, and we'll go out for a drive, and we'll go and get a cup of coffee.
We used to do that. Unfortunately, that ends. Yeah. That stage ends because it just becomes so hard to get them out of there, and they don't remember. So you're doing it for you. At some point, and I hope your dad never gets to that point, but that's how my mom progressed. Like she used to, I used to pick her up. She lived at my sister's house at first when she first got into this problem. And I'd pick her up at my sister's house whenever I flew into Calgary and take her out with me to the house in the mountains. And she loved it there, and everything was fine. And then it just got to where she couldn't get up and down the stairs, and she started smoking again for some reason after having not smoked for like 40 years or something. And she almost burned my house down one day. Like I found a burnt cigarette, and she claimed she didn't smoke. She didn't know what I was talking about and all this. So it just got too hard.
Gets a little weird.
And then we'd bring her out occasionally on Thanksgiving or something. But so anyways, good luck with your dad. I hope that works out okay. So now you're a sales guy, right?
Well, it's an interesting thing. What had happened was I was working in LA, and I had this thing. I had all my data racks with Netron stuff in, and power distribution on a film set's very different in the way it's done. We have these 100 amp lunch boxes that we pull out everywhere, and normally on the corner of each set you'll have a data distribution point with power and all this. So you'll have the 1200 amp box with a bunch of Bates connectors, and then you whack a node rack on top of that, and then it just got really messy. So I went to the guys at Dadco, and I'm like, can you guys build me like a rack mount that is like 12 Edison sockets run off 100 amp Bates? And they went, yeah, we can do that. So they built me a prototype, and I was like, yeah, that's cool, but can you flip it around so that the sockets line up more with the ports on an EN12? And they went, yeah, okay. So they built me that prototype, and I tested it for a while, and I was like, yeah, that's really cool. We should build some of these. And that was right before the strike started.
Yes.
But I still have that first one. And so I was like, oh, that's really cool. And later that year I came back to Perth, and I have a friend, Craig Beatson, that runs a company called Omegatech. And I went to him because he makes electrical distribution products for the entertainment industry. So, rack mount distros and stage boxes and cabling and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, hey man, I designed this thing with the guys in the States. He's like, I could build that. I said, I'm like, you can build something like that? And he's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, easy man, no worries. So I was like, oh, cool, okay. And so, I thought, oh, well, maybe we can do something with that. And then, when I came back after a couple of years later, after my mum died, he was like, hey man, I know you're in town. I know what happened. He said, hey man, if you're bored or if you need some money or if you want to come and do something, come and hang out at the shop for a couple of days. And because I've known Craig for about 25 years. He was like a young kid with a van with, a few park end bars, and he was doing little gigs and stuff. And then he had a small rental company, and at the time before I left Perth, I had a lot of club gigs. I was doing bands and all this sort of stuff. And when I decided to move to America, I called him up. I said, hey man, I'm moving to the US. I got all these gigs. Do you want them? And he was like, yeah. So he became the heir apparent. I basically gave him my slate of gigs.
You handed him your business. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. And then, so, when I was here, he only ended up working a few, 3-4 days, whatever it was. And then, we kept in touch and he's like, and I sort of started to intimate to him that I was going to move back to Australia. And, obviously his focus has always been live entertainment, live events. I'm a film guy. I know film guys. Let's see if we can get a film product line going. Let's see if I can help you build your business. Let's see if we can get into the lighting control side of things.
Yeah.
So there was a few things going on. And when I basically made the decision to move home, I told him and he said, all right, I've got a job for you. I was just like, whoa, okay. Because, I'd had a few people say to me, look, listen, man, if you move back to Australia, throw your hat in the pool as a film program in Australia, you'd be top 5 day one. And I'm kind of like, yeah, but most of the major film production happens in, Brisbane or Melbourne or Sydney. And, if I'm going to work on a movie
as well
in
be
Brisbane,
in LA. Yeah.
Might as well be in LA. Yeah. I mean, it's a 5-hour flight instead of a 20-hour flight, but can't be there for my dad if I'm in Brisbane
flight.
4 or 5 months at a time.
Right.
So, Craig basically offered me a job in sales and marketing, which is again a tie back to that first job that I had at a high school.
Yeah.
Where I learned about inventory control and customer relations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So I started working for Craig, still running Cine Control in the US, which is one of the reasons that I was, at LDI and met you this year.
Yeah.
One of the things for a few years now, Sada and I have been running training classes on Onyx for Local 728. We call it the lighting or the film lighting programmers boot camp. Because if you go to any major console manufacturer's training class, they're teaching how to be a rock and roll programmer or a theater programmer, not how to be a film programmer. So basically we sat down and we wrote a training course for how to be a film programmer.
Yeah.
How we use, groups and presets differently. How we can utilize 2D plans differently, how we can do, the same skill set that you would use in a class, but that slightly tweaked application for a movie set.
Yeah.
So we'd been teaching that for a few years and we decided to basically record that. And in fact, I'm heading back to LA at the end of February and early March. We're going to be teaching a couple of courses for 728 again. We're going to be opening up our class to the public for the first time.
Wow.
And we're also filming the advanced portion of the class where we really dive into pixel mapping and, the effects engine and all that sort of stuff.
Very cool.
So
very cool.
At the moment, I'm still kind of jumping back and forth between both worlds a little bit, but I'm really, one of the things that I like about Craig and Omega and the way the business works is that there's this general product line that he makes. But we had a client call up last week that was like, hey man, I do a lot of stuff with like corporate gigs and, we've always got cameras and then, there's always someone that just wants to take a power board and gaff tape it to the leg of the tripod. It doesn't look very professional. Can you guys come up with something? And so, we make a large stage box, which is like, PowerCon or TrueCon in and 6 GPO outlets and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, could we put a power board in like a metal housing? So basically over the course of a couple of days and working with this client, I said to Craig, I said, all right, what about if we build this? And I just drew him something and, handed it over the desk and he looked at it and then he jumped into his design software and he came up with something and he sent that to me and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And I said that to the client. I said, what do you think of this? And he's like, yeah, but what about this, this, and this? Give that back to Craig. Craig sits there and spends another day drawing it. And, in the course of 4 days, we basically redesigned this new product and we got the cost of the metal stampings from our sheet metal guys today. And so tomorrow I'm going to be able to call the client and say, yeah, it's going to cost you this much.
That's one of the best things about being a small company is that you still listen to your customers. When you get big enough that you now think that you know everything and use this because I told you should use this.
Right.
I hate that.
Yeah.
I hate that.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, that's always been Craig's philosophy. If you buy 10 of them, I'll build it.
Yeah,
and,
that's amazing.
So this customer was
not
like,
very scalable. It's difficult to scale that type of a business. Although, like City Theatrical did it. There's a bunch of companies that are sort of like little skunk works manufacturers, and they're able to quickly
be able to create those niche products.
Well, I mean,
someone needs them.
Where I find it really interesting is that Omegatech sort of falls. You know, you have the guys that are just like one guy building something in his garage. And then you have someone like, you know, LSC who builds. You know,
right.
You know, we're kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
You know, we could spend a bunch of money on R&D and build a more digital interface, and that would put us sort of into the LSC league, but that's going to take a lot of capital. But at the same time, we're still in that sort of niche, boutique-y kind of thing where someone says, "Can you build me this?" Yep, we can do that for you. We can have that for you in a couple of weeks. You know, like
does Con do the Obsidian stuff as well, or just Elation?
They're as far as I know, they're the national distributor for Obsidian.
Well, I know they're
Australia.
Elation, but I didn't know if they're Obsidian as well.
Mm-hmm.
ULA. Yeah.
I think they handle more of the Netron stuff than the Flex stuff.
Okay.
So that's a whole other
interesting
story. But you know, it's one of my areas of expertise because I'm actually a certified trainer for Elation on Onyx and Netron. So yeah, actually, it was really cool. I got to go to HQ in the Netherlands last year and get anointed as a trainer for those guys, which was really cool.
That's cool. They're nice people. I mean, Eric is a very, very close friend of mine. Has been for a long time. I'm not close with Toby at all. I know him, but I'm not close with him. And I was close with Scott and Chuck Davies back in the day. You know, but so yeah.
Well, I mean, this is where the Elation guys got really smart. Is, you know, when Martin started to sort of empty out the talent pool, they picked up a whole bunch of those guys.
I
think that's been a huge part of their success. I mean, like I said, late 90s, you know, Martin was like this company that made these cheap, crappy DJ lights. And then, you know, the pinnacle at that stage was, you know, Verilight or whoever. And then, you know, 10 years later, Martin was the thing. And Elation made cheap little DJ lights. And
it's funny how it all evolved.
I mean, I remember when I was...
All you had to do was go to LDI, and Martin and High End had the big booths. And then all of a sudden, like by the early 2000s, Martin and High End had tiny little booths, and Elation and Chauvet were huge, you know? It was like, what just happened here? Something happened. So
it's just, again, I think it's that ability to manufacture at scale.
Well, I mean, the next interesting step with all of that is going to be seeing, you know, I think everyone's in a bit of a panic to try and find an alternative to manufacturing in China, partially because of the president who's now in the U.S., who's dead set on tariffs. And, you know, it makes it complicated when you're manufacturing in China because you're able to manufacture for, call it 70% less or 60% less than somewhere else in the world. Well, now if you've got a president who's adding 50% tariffs in your largest market in the world, you know, possibly 50% of your sales, it's brutal. So you got to find alternatives. And I know a lot of them are scrambling to do that now. So,
I mean, that's going to be another thing that's going to have an interesting effect on the industry and how it's going to function. I mean, you know, as a guy that runs a sales company, it's going to be like, okay, this is interesting. You know, I think one of the advantages that Omegatech certainly has is the fact that we're based in Australia, we manufacture in Australia. Our customer base is mostly Australian, although we do have clients in New Zealand and other regions in the APAC. So, you know, for us, I mean, I've had this discussion with Craig. Would not make a lot of sense for us to try and crack into the American market just because of the volume and the saturation there, and the fact that going through a UL listing is a pain in the ass.
I love that. More money, more problems.
We could, well, no, but I mean, this is the thing, the product that we make in Australia would work equally as well in Europe. So, you know, that could be part of the fabulous 5-year plan. I don't know. You know,
it's always the argument when you're in business, you either need to create more product for your customers or find more customers for your product. So there's two ways to grow a business, and those are the two. Well, it's not that scientific, really. So
and it's interesting. I had a couple of conversations with people that know both Craig and I. Craig is a genius when it comes to designing this stuff and the the thought and the logic and how things work together. You know, like we have a little, you know, one of the bumper stickers we made recently, it says made by the people who have fought the fight, because he's been there and he's done that, same as me. So he knows what clients want, and if he's not sure, he asks them. We you know, our products are built to solve problems that people have faced. And he's really, really good at that. I'm really good at getting in front of people and being like, hey, you need this and you need this, and this is why this is good. And you know, like,
well, you gave me that indication right when you said you were in that town in Oregon, and you walked right up to the grip truck and said, hey, you the lighting guys? You know, I'm Chris. Nice to meet you. You know,
exactly. No,
call
I mean,
me if you ever need somebody.
Yeah, that's kind of my personality. Like I'm a people person. I like interacting with people. I think that's one of the reasons that I enjoy, you know, the training side of what I do so much. I learn, you know, and it comes back to someone showed me, I feel indebted in a way. You know, I've got the career that I've got because someone saw me and said, oh, this kid is interested. I want to show him something that I know. Whereas for me, it's like, I want to, you know, like even when I was working on movie sets full time, there's always that one guy that was kind of like hanging around the console, being like, oh, what are you doing, man? That looks really cool. I'm like, oh, you interested in this? Oh, yeah. All right, come on, man, hang out. I'll show you what I'm doing.
You're so right. You're so right. You know, I have a 20-year-old son, and I'm trying to teach him the same thing. Like, my magic power is you know, my network. You know, it's not me, it's the friends that I have. They're the important people. I'm not. I talk to a lot of people. I know a lot of people, and that brings a lot of value to me, both personally and professionally. But, and I try to tell my son that, talk to everyone. Assume the guy next to you at McDonald's ordering his food is the next guy that's going to make a difference in your life. And if he's not, I mean, what did you lose? You know?
Exactly. Well, one of the things that I first did when I first joined 728 in 2015, and I tell this story to people because I'm like, you should do this. When I first joined, I was still living in Portland, and a mate of mine who I met on that first movie in Ashland was living in LA at the time. And I was like, hey man, I'm coming down to LA. Can I crash on your couch? So I crashed on his couch for like 6 months. So in order to get out of his hair a little bit, if there was a training class at the 728 hall on the weekend, I went to the training class, and it might have been something that I thought I knew something about. But every time I went to a class, I always learned something. I always met some new people, and there was always a free lunch, which is pretty rare these days.
Those are three pretty great reasons.
Exactly. You know, pick up some knowledge, increase your network, get some free food.
Fill your belly.
You know, meet some cool people. And I think that was a reason why I became, you know, more well-known in the local more quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the fact that I'm an Aussie doesn't hurt, but, you know, there's a million Aussies in LA, so it's not such a huge deal in LA. But, you know, like increasing your knowledge base, increasing your network is critical things if you want to be successful in this industry, to the point that as someone that teaches training classes, I like to go to training classes just to see how other people are doing it. You know, what are their techniques?
Makes
what are they
a lot
teaching?
Of sense. Yeah.
It's
smart.
It does make sense because
it's smart, man. It's smart.
It increases your own skill set.
Yeah. Well, and even if it's just sitting down at a bar to grab a beer, talk to the person next to you, you know, like what are you losing? You're already sitting there, you're already having the beer, and not just talk to them, listen to them. Like sometimes I'll be 20 minutes into a conversation before we get around to what do I do, you know, because I'm learning about that person because I'm slotting them in somewhere, whether it's useless information that could help me personally, information that I could help him personally, professionally, etc. You know, and sometimes it's just meaningless conversation. Sometimes it's just killing time. We're talking about, hey, how do you think the Dolphins are going to do next year? You know,
exactly. Well, and if anything, for me, I want to talk less about what I do for a living, because the minute you tell people that you work in the film industry or that you work on a Star Wars show or
they shut up.
Marvel,
they shut up.
They either shut up or they ask you a million questions just about that thing, and it's just like
it becomes about that.
Job.
Well, not only that, you lose all the value that you were going to get. Like, you know, it's like dinner parties. I used to say to people, like, I hate going to dinner parties with regular people who aren't in the industry. And they're like, well, why? That's kind of weird. And it's because as soon as someone realizes that last week you just met Taylor Swift and you know, you were backstage hanging out because your buddy is the lighting designer or something, the whole room sort of either shuts down completely or they ask you a billion questions. But they shut down because their stories dwarf in comparison to I was hanging out with Taylor Swift last week, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting industry from that standpoint because, you know, I remember a great conversation I had with a guy. I got upgraded to first class. I was flying to Chicago. And this guy spent 2 hours telling me that he works in springs. He's in the springs business. Springs, anything from the tiniest little spring up to these springs that are 25 feet in diameter or whatever, right? And he's going to a hardware show in Chicago, and it probably wasn't 2 hours. It was probably a half hour, and I learned way more about springs and the spring business than I ever wanted to know, right?
Wanted to know,
But I listened to his entire conversation, and then he said, so what do you do? And I said, well, you know, I sell lighting and concert lighting and stuff. And he's like, oh. You know, and he just felt shitty about his own life after that moment. You know, it's like, oh, man, my life sucks.
See, but the thing I would have been, the takeaway I would have had from that conversation, and if you're going to talk about springs for 2 hours, you better be pretty bloody passionate about it.
He's passionate about springs.
And that's what would have struck me about that conversation. And then I would have been like,
for sure.
Can you make me a set of springs for my 84 SVI? That would have been my question.
Of course. Yeah, that's perfect.
You know, but no, it's,
you know what, Chris,
it's always, like I said,
it's been 2 hours and I think 2.5 hours actually, because we started over again at one point. But I know it's friggin', what is it? It's 12:30 in the morning for you too.
Something like that.
So,
I'd stop watching. I'd stop looking at the clock.
I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours though. Like this is I hate to say it, but it's been way more interesting than I expected. Not that I expected you to be boring, but I don't know enough about television and film lighting to really have good conversations, but you're a great conversationalist, so you've taught me a lot. So
well, here's what I would do. You should get Benoit back on the podcast.
Yeah.
And then you should talk to my business partner, Sada Devereaux, who is a phenomenal lighting draftsperson in 728.
Well, I'm sure Sarah's all over that because we do a podcast called Leading Ladies. And it's all about the women in the industry. And it's been great. She's the host of it. And I think she's probably on her 8th or 9th episode by now. And she's done a great job and had some amazing people. So I'm sure unfortunately, when great women come forward now, she usually nips them before I ever get to even talk to them or know about them or anything. She just grabs them and I lose that opportunity. So, but yeah, we'll definitely do that. So, but I mean, we should do this again someday, you know?
That'd be great.
I'd love to hear a lot more. And I'm sure given the sort of path that your life has taken, there's going to be 1,000 more stories, you know, in the next year.
I mean, it's definitely been a great adventure, and I've had a lot of fun, and I've met some amazing people. And one of the things that I've loved about working in film is you get to see shit that like I've rigged lights inside the wings of the Spruce Goose. Not everyone can say they've even been on the Spruce Goose, but I've been in the wings.
Crazy. That is cool. Crazy.
It's just cool. Fun, man. It's been a trip, and again, you know, like I said, people help me along the way. I want to help other people, and that's kind of one of my modus operandi is.
That's what it's about.
That's what it's about. So,
and good luck with your
another
dad.
Conversation can help with that.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's
all right.
It's
thanks so much,
glad
Chris.
I can be here for him. Thanks, man.
Yeah. All right, buddy.